Marcus Reed had pulled bodies from twisted metal before, but he'd never rescued someone wearing a $50,000 watch while driving a beat-up Honda Civic. The contradiction didn't register until later in the moment. All that mattered was the unconscious woman trapped in the overturned car, gasoline pooling beneath the wreckage on Highway 101. "Thank you," she whispered, as Marcus dragged her clear of the vehicle, her designer clothes torn and bloodied her to manicured hands gripping his work-stained fingers with desperate strength. "What's your name?" "Marcus, just Marcus." "Elena Martinez," she replied, though something in her hesitation suggested even she wasn't sure if that was true. 2 weeks later, Elena would walk into Marcus's garage in Oakland, claiming she needed car repairs on the same Honda she'd nearly died in. She'd pay cash, ask no questions about price, and somehow know more about business strategy than any freelance consultant should. She'd help his daughter Amy with calculus problems that stumped Stanford graduates, then claim she'd always been good with numbers. But Marcus wouldn't discover Elena's real identity until it was too late, until he had fallen completely in love with a woman who didn't exist. What Marcus didn't know was that Elena Martinez was actually Elena Vasquez, a billionaire technology heiress worth $2.3 billion, living a double life in Oakland's working-class neighborhoods. Every Friday afternoon she spent in his garage, every dinner she shared with his family, every moment of happiness they built together was constructed on a foundation of lies that would eventually destroy them all. This is the story of two people from impossible different worlds. Marcus Reed, a single father struggling to save his family's auto repair shop while raising his brilliant daughter Amy alone. And Elena Vasquez, one of the wealthiest women in America, so lonely in her Palo Alto mansion that she'd rather pretend to be poor than live rich and alone. Watch how genuine love collided with billion-dollar deception. How a working man's pride destroyed the only authentic relationship a tech heiress had ever known. And how sometimes the greatest wealth means having the courage to lose everything for the chance to love someone honestly. What would you do if you discovered the person you loved had been lying about everything, their name, their job, their entire life, but their lies had actually saved your family from financial ruin? Would love be enough to forgive a deception that changed your daughter's future forever? Subscribe if you believe love should conquer all barriers. Like if you think money complicates everything it touches. Comment and tell us, is it possible to build real love on fake foundations? The alarm clock screamed at 4:30 a.m., just like it had every morning for the past 3 years. Marcus Reed's calloused hand found the snooze button by muscle memory, but his mind was already racing through the day's challenges. The Hernandez family's minivan needed a new transmission they couldn't afford. The shop's ancient hydraulic lift was making that grinding noise again, the one that meant expensive repairs he couldn't afford either. And somewhere in the stack of bills on his kitchen counter was another notice from First National Bank, growing more aggressive with each passing month. Marcus swung his legs over the side of the bed, his knees protesting with the familiar ache of a man who'd spent 3 decades crawling under cars. The framed photo on his nightstand caught the dim morning light, Sarah's smile frozen in time, taken 2 summers before the cancer diagnosis that would change everything. He touched her face through the glass, a ritual as constant as breathing. "Morning, beautiful," he whispered. "Amy's got that college interview today. Wish you were here to see it." The modest 2-bedroom apartment in Oakland's Fruitvale district was a far cry from the suburban home they'd once shared, but it was clean, safe, and filled with the echoes of laughter that somehow made the cramped space feel infinite. Family photos lined the hallway. Amy's soccer victories, school awards, father-daughter fishing trips to Half Moon Bay. Each image told the story of a man determined to be enough parent for 2. In the kitchen, Marcus started the coffee maker, a temperamental machine that Sarah had insisted on keeping despite its tendency to leak. The familiar ritual of morning preparation had become meditation. Scrambled eggs for Amy, who had inherited her mother's metabolism and could eat anything without gaining an ounce. Toast with peanut butter because that's what they could afford. Orange juice from concentrate because fresh was a luxury reserved for special occasions. "Dad, you don't have to make breakfast every morning," Amy had told him countless times. "I can grab something at school." But Marcus knew better. These small acts of service were how he showed love, how he honored Sarah's memory, how he convinced himself he was succeeding at the impossible task of being everything his daughter needed. Reed's Auto Repair sat on a corner lot that had seen better decades. The building's bones were solid. Marcus had learned to see potential where others saw problems. But the paint was fading and the old Reed and Son sign needed updating since there was no sun. Only Amy, and she had dreams that stretched far beyond the grease and grit of the automotive world. Marcus had inherited the shop from his father, who'd inherited it from his father, creating a legacy of honest work and fair prices that had sustained 3 generations of Oakland families. The neighborhood had changed around them. Trendy coffee shops replacing corner markets, tech workers buying up the modest homes and transforming them into architectural showcases. But Reed's remained constant, a refuge for working families who needed their cars fixed right the first time, at prices that wouldn't break budgets already stretched thin. Marcus is the only mechanic in the Bay Area who will tell you when you don't need work done. Mrs. Chen had told her sister last week, not knowing Marcus could hear every word through the thin office walls. That comment had made him prouder than any 5-star Yelp review ever could. The shop's regular customers had become extended family. There was Miguel Santos, whose delivery truck kept food on 3 families' tables. Rosa Martinez, whose ancient Honda carried her to 2 jobs in night school. Old Mr. Patterson, whose pristine 1987 Buick was his only connection to independence. Marcus knew their stories, their struggles, their dreams. He fixed their cars, but somehow they fixed something in him too. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Marcus closed the shop early to drive Amy to her calculus tutoring sessions at the Oakland Community Center. She had her mother's mind for numbers and her father's determination to succeed against long odds. Stanford University had been Amy's dream since middle school, and Marcus had promised Sarah on her deathbed that their daughter would get every opportunity they could provide. The college fund that had once seemed so promising, built penny by penny over 17 years, had evaporated during Sarah's final battle with cancer. Experimental treatments not covered by insurance. Travel to specialists in Houston and Seattle. The decision to spend every last dollar fighting for one more day, one more conversation, one more chance to say goodbye. Marcus had never regretted those choices, but the financial reality was stark. Amy's college dreams now cost more than most people's houses. Stanford's looking for my application fee, Amy had mentioned casually the previous week, as if discussing weekend plans instead of a $500 expense that might as well have been $5,000 given the state of their bank account. Marcus had nodded, smiled, and made a mental note to ask Miguel about overtime opportunities. Pride was a luxury he couldn't afford when it came to Amy's future. The divorce papers were supposed to have been simple. Sarah's medical bills had driven them close to bankruptcy, but the life insurance policy would eventually settle most debts. What Marcus hadn't anticipated was the crushing loneliness that followed the way grief could make every decision feel impossible. Every day feel like swimming upstream against a current designed to pull him under. Father Rodriguez at St. Mary's had offered counsel. Grief is love with nowhere to go, Marcus. But Amy needs that love now more than ever. So Marcus had channeled his love into action. He learned to braid hair from YouTube videos, mastered the art of parent-teacher conferences, and somehow became both mother and father to a teenage girl who was rapidly becoming smarter, stronger, and more beautiful than he'd ever imagined possible. The shop's financial struggles had intensified over the past year. Chain repair shops with aggressive marketing budgets were stealing customers who chased discount coupons instead of trusting relationships. The neighborhood's gentrification meant higher property taxes and rent increases that outpaced Marcus's ability to raise prices without losing the working families who'd been his bread and butter for decades. Last month's mortgage payment had been 3 days late. This month's might not happen at all unless the Patterson transmission job came through, and even then Marcus was robbing tomorrow to pay today. The cycle was unsustainable, but he couldn't see any alternative that didn't involve disappointing the daughter who looked at him like he could solve any problem, fix any broken thing, make any dream come true. "I'll figure it out," had become Marcus's mantra, whispered to Sarah's photo every morning and repeated like a prayer throughout each day. Because the alternative, admitting defeat, closing the shop, crushing Amy's dreams, was simply unthinkable. The penthouse overlooking San Francisco Bay should have felt like paradise. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the Golden Gate Bridge, the sparkling waters of the Pacific, and the rolling hills of Marin County. Every piece of furniture had been selected by designers whose hourly rates exceeded most people's monthly salaries. The art collection alone was worth more than entire Oakland neighborhoods. But Elena Vasquez, standing in her $15 million home at 6 a.m. with a cup of Ethiopian coffee grown on farms her foundation supported, felt like she was living in a beautiful prison. At 47, Elena possessed the kind of success that business magazines wrote cover stories about. Vasquez Technologies, the company her immigrant father had built from a single garage in San Jose, now employed over 50,000 people across 6 continents. Their innovations in artificial intelligence and sustainable energy had revolutionized industries and generated wealth that stretched into the billions. Elena's face graced the covers of Fortune, Forbes, and Time, usually accompanied by headlines about female leadership, technological breakthrough, or philanthropic achievement. The irony wasn't lost on her that someone who'd helped connect the world through technology felt more isolated than ever. 6 months ago, her father, Roberto, had died of a sudden heart attack while reviewing quarterly reports in his home office. The man who'd taught Elena that business was about serving communities, not just shareholders, had worked until his final breath. His death had left Elena questioning everything about the empire they'd built together and the price of success measured in dollars rather than relationships. Money is a tool, mija, Roberto had always said. It can build hospitals or buy yachts. The choice reveals who you really are. Elena's choice had been hospitals, schools, and community centers. The Vasquez Foundation had given away over $800 million in the past decade, funding everything from childhood literacy programs to cancer research. But charitable giving, she discovered, was often a one-way transaction that left her feeling more disconnected than fulfilled. The divorce from Richard Cross had become final just 2 months ago, though their marriage had been over in all but legal terms for nearly 2 years. Richard, a prominent San Francisco attorney with political ambitions, had been everything her social circle deemed appropriate. Handsome, educated, connected, and comfortable with the obligations that came with extraordinary wealth. What he hadn't been was faithful, honest, or capable of seeing Elena as anything more than a stepping stone to power. The affair with his campaign manager had made headlines in both the business and society pages, turning Elena's private pain into public entertainment. The settlement had been generous. Richard walked away with $50 million, but Elena would have paid twice that amount to escape a marriage that had become as artificial as the smiles they'd worn at charity galas. The fertility struggles had been Elena's most closely guarded secret. 3 miscarriages, 2 rounds of IVF, countless specialists who spoke in gentle euphemisms about biological realities and alternative options. Each failure had felt like her body's betrayal of her deepest dreams. Richard had been supportive initially, then impatient, then openly resentful, as their intimate life became a series of scheduled attempts in medical procedures. "Maybe this is the universe telling us something," he'd said after the 3rd miscarriage, his words like stones thrown at glass. "We have everything we need. Why complicate our lives?" But Elena had wanted to complicate her life with midnight feedings, scraped knees that needed kissing, homework battles, and soccer games on Saturday mornings. She'd wanted to love someone who would love her back, not because of her net worth, but because she made good pancakes and gave the best hugs, and could be counted on to show up every time, no matter what. The loneliness was most acute in moments of supposed triumph. Board meetings where her ideas shaped the future of entire industries. Award ceremonies where she accepted recognition for philanthropic leadership. Company parties where she was surrounded by hundreds of employees who depended on her decisions, but couldn't share her burdens. Grace Chen, her CFO and closest friend, had been blunt about Elena's isolation. "You've built walls so high that even people who want to know you can't find the door." The irony was that Elena craved authenticity in a world that seemed designed to prevent it. How could she tell if someone loved her or her bank account? How could she form genuine friendships when every conversation felt like a potential business transaction? How could she experience normal human connection when her very presence changed the dynamics of every room she entered? 2 months ago, Elena had started an experiment. She'd bought a modest Honda Civic, used Reliable and Visible, and begun exploring the Bay Area as Elena Martinez, a name that wouldn't trigger Google alerts or stock price speculation. She'd volunteered at soup kitchens in Oakland, attended community meetings in San Rafael, and shopped at farmers markets in Berkeley, always paying cow, always careful to blend into the background of ordinary life. These small adventures had given Elena glimpses of the world she'd lost somewhere between inherited responsibility and extraordinary success. The joy of helping an elderly man load groceries into his car without him knowing she could have bought the entire store. The satisfaction of listening to a young mother's worries about her child's education without immediately calculating how much money could solve the problem. The simple pleasure of conversation that had nothing to do with quarterly earnings or foundation strategies. I want to matter to someone, Elena had confided to Grace during one of their rare personal conversations. Not because of what I can provide, but because of who I am when everything else is stripped away. The accident on Highway 101 would soon reveal exactly who Elena was when everything else was stripped away, and who she could become when genuine love finally found a way through the walls she'd spent a lifetime building. The San Francisco Bay Area existed as a study in contrasts, a region where extraordinary wealth lived within walking distance of grinding poverty, where billion-dollar companies shared neighborhoods with families struggling to afford rent increases that outpaced salary growth by impossible margins. Oakland's Fruitvale district, where Marcus Reed had spent his entire life, represented the Bay Area's working heart. Here, three-generation families lived in modest homes they'd bought when teachers and mechanics could still afford Bay Area real estate. Corner stores displayed signs in Spanish, Vietnamese, and English. Children played soccer in Franklin Park while their parents worked double shifts to afford the American dream that seemed to grow more expensive with each passing year. The community's strength lay in its interconnectedness. When the Hernandez family's apartment caught fire, neighbors donated furniture and clothes without being asked. When old Mrs. Chen needed help with grocery shopping after her hip surgery, a rotating schedule of volunteers appeared without formal organization. When Marcus Reed's wife Sarah was fighting cancer, casseroles and prayers arrived in equal abundance, carrying families through their darkest months. 12 miles north Palo Alto, in San Francisco's financial district, represented the Bay Area's technological brain. Here, former garage startups occupied gleaming towers, their lobbies decorated with abstract art worth more than entire Oakland city blocks. Young entrepreneurs pitched world-changing ideas over $20 salads, while established executives managed global empires from conference rooms with million-dollar views. The contrast wasn't just economic, it was cultural, emotional, and spiritual. In Oakland, success was measured by stability, keeping your job, maintaining your health, raising children who respected their elders and worked hard for their achievements. In Silicon Valley, success was measured by disruption, changing industries, accumulating wealth, and achieving recognition in publications that ordinary families had never heard of. Highway 101 served as more than a transportation corridor connecting these two worlds. It was a metaphor for the social mobility that seemed increasingly elusive in modern America. Every day, thousands of working families drove north to service the needs of technology companies, cleaning offices, preparing food, maintaining landscapes, and caring for children whose parents were too busy changing the world to change diapers. The irony was palpable. The very technology designed to connect humanity had somehow created deeper divisions between those who owned the platforms and those who simply used them. But sometimes in moments of genuine crisis, these artificial barriers dissolved, revealing the fundamental truth that everyone, regardless of their zip code or net worth, needed the same basic things: love, purpose, and the knowledge that their life mattered to someone else. The rain had started as a gentle mist during Elena's drive from the anonymous charity event in Marin County, but by the time she reached the Golden Gate Bridge, it had transformed into a torrential downpour that turned Highway 101 into a gauntlet of brake lights and hydroplaning vehicles. Elena gripped the steering wheel of her modest Honda Civic, grateful for the anonymity the weather provided. No photographers could capture her leaving another obligatory appearance, where she'd smiled, written checks, and felt like a fraud accepting gratitude for writing numbers on pieces of paper. She'd been thinking about her father's advice: the best charity happens when no one knows your name, mija. That's when you know your heart is in the right place. Tonight's $100,000 donation to the Children's Hospital would remain anonymous, just like the dozen others she'd made this month. Money was easy to give. What Elena craved was the chance to give something of herself. The Porsche in her rearview mirror had been tailgating for the past 2 miles, its driver apparently believing that aggressive proximity could somehow part the rain-soaked traffic ahead. Elena moved to the right lane, hoping to let the impatient driver pass, but physics had other plans. The Porsche's sudden lane change at 70 miles per hour met a sheet of standing water, and Elena watched in horror as the expensive car began to spin. Time compressed into slow-motion frames, the Porsche rotating like a pinwheel, its driver's terrified face visible through the side window. The sound of metal meeting concrete, the sickening crunch of safety glass exploding. The car flipping once, twice, three times before landing upside down in the median, strip steam rising from its crumpled hood like incense at a funeral that hadn't happened yet. Elena's crisis management training, a byproduct of running a billion-dollar company, kicked in immediately. She pulled to the shoulder hazard lights flashing and dialed 911 while mentally cataloging the scene: single vehicle accident, car inverted, possible fuel leak, traffic backing up fast. The 911 operator's voice crackled through her phone. Units are en route, estimated arrival 12 minutes due to weather conditions. 12 minutes might as well have been 12 hours. Marcus Reed had been returning from a parts run to San Rafael when he saw the accident unfold in his rearview mirror. 3 decades of fixing broken things had given him an ability to assess mechanical disasters quickly, and everything about this situation screamed danger. The Porsche's frame was compromised, fluids were leaking, and the smell of gasoline was growing stronger with each passing second. He pulled his weathered F-150 to the shoulder behind a Honda Civic, whose driver was already on the phone with emergency services. Good help was coming, but Marcus had seen enough accidents to know that sometimes help arrived too late. The woman trapped in the Porsche was unconscious, her blonde hair matted with blood, designer clothes torn and stained. Through the spider-webbed windshield, Marcus could see she was breathing but unresponsive. The car's electrical system sparked intermittently, and the acrid smell of leaking fuel was growing stronger. "Lady, if you can hear me, we're getting you out of there," Marcus called, though he wasn't sure if she could hear anything through the twisted metal and shattered glass. The car's frame groaned ominously as Marcus circled it, looking for the safest entry point. His knees protested as he dropped to the wet asphalt, crawling toward the driver's side window. The space was barely large enough for his shoulders, but Marcus had spent his career reaching into impossible spaces to fix things that others had given up on. "Sir, the fire department is on the way," Elena called from behind him, but Marcus was already committed to the rescue. The metallic taste of adrenaline filled his mouth as he punched through the remaining glass, cutting his hands in the process. The unconscious woman stirred as Marcus reached her, her eyes fluttering open just long enough to focus on his face. In that moment of connection, her vulnerable confusion meeting his determined calm, something passed between them that neither would fully understand until much later. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rain and approaching sirens. "Marcus, just Marcus," he replied, working to free her from the seatbelt that had probably saved her life. "You're safe now." The car's fuel tank chose that moment to decide whether this would be a rescue or a tragedy. Marcus felt the woman's hand grip his with surprising strength as he pulled her from the wreckage, both of them clear of the vehicle, just as emergency responders arrived, their red and blue lights painting the rain-soaked highway in urgent colors. San Francisco General's emergency room operated with the efficient chaos that Marcus remembered from his own visits during Sarah's illness. Bright lights, urgent voices, the antiseptic smell that somehow made everything feel both sterile and alive. He sat in the plastic waiting chair, where a nurse had deposited him after treating the cuts on his hands, watching through the observation window as medical professionals worked on the woman he'd pulled from the wreckage. "Sir," a young resident approached, clipboard in hand. "The patient you helped rescue is stable. Concussion, some cuts and bruises, but she's going to be fine. You probably saved her life." Marcus nodded, relief flooding through him. "Good, that's good. Can I—" He gestured toward the treatment area. "She's asking for you, actually. Says she wants to thank the man who helped her." Through the partially open curtain, Marcus could see her sitting up on the examination table, a white bandage covering a cut on her forehead. Even in a hospital gown, even with her hair disheveled and her makeup gone, she possessed an elegance that seemed out of place in the emergency room's harsh fluorescent light. "Marcus," she said as he approached, and he was surprised that she'd remembered his name. "I wanted to thank you properly. I'm Elena Martinez." The name meant nothing to Marcus, which was exactly what Elena had hoped for. In this sterile room, stripped of her usual armor of expensive clothing and professional recognition, she was just a woman who'd narrowly escaped death thanks to a stranger's courage. "Just glad you're okay," Marcus replied, feeling awkward in the medical setting that held so many difficult memories. "Car accidents. They can go bad fast. You were lucky." "Luck had nothing to do with it." Elena said, studying his face with an intensity that made Marcus slightly uncomfortable. You risked your safety for someone you didn't even know. Why? Marcus shrugged, genuinely puzzled by the question. Because you needed help. That's, that's what people do. But Elena knew better. In her world, people calculated the risks and benefits of every action, weighed potential liability against possible gain, consulted lawyers before offering assistance to strangers. This man had seen someone in danger and acted without hesitation, without expectation of reward, without even considering that she might be important enough to make his rescue worthwhile. How do I find you? Elena asked as the nurse arrived to discharge her. To thank you properly, I mean. Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile Elena had seen all evening. No need for that. Just drive careful, okay? Rain makes everything dangerous. As Marcus walked away, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the desire to know someone better, not because of what they could do for her business or foundation, but because of who they were when everything else was stripped away. She watched him disappear into the hospital corridor, already planning how she might arrange to see Marcus Reed again. 2 weeks passed before Elena worked up the courage to return to Oakland. The accident had shaken her more than she'd initially realized, not just the physical trauma, but the reminder of how quickly life could change, how precious ordinary moments became when you thought they might be your last. The memory of Marcus Reed's steady voice saying, "You're safe now," had replayed in her mind during sleepless nights in her Palo Alto mansion. Elena had resisted Grace's suggestion to hire a private investigator to find her rescuer. If it's meant to happen, our paths will cross again. She'd told her CFO, though privately, she'd been plotting ways to make those paths intersect naturally. The Honda Civic had sustained more damage than initially apparent. The insurance adjuster had recommended 3 shops in the Oakland area, but only one of them, Reed's Auto Repair, carried the authentic, no-nonsense tone that Elena associated with her rescuer's voice. When she'd called to inquire about an estimate, the gravelly voice that answered the phone confirmed her suspicion. Reed's Auto, this is Marcus. Hi, this is Elena Martinez. I have a Honda Civic that needs some work after an accident. Could I bring it by for an estimate? The shop occupied a corner lot in Fruitvale, its hand-painted sign and modest storefront, a stark contrast to the gleaming dealerships Elena usually frequented. She parked the damaged Honda in front of the service bay, suddenly nervous about this orchestrated reunion. Through the open garage door, she could see Marcus bent over the engine of an ancient pickup truck, his work clothes stained with honest grease, his movements efficient and practiced. He looked up as she approached, and Elena saw the moment of recognition flicker across his face, quickly replaced by professional courtesy tinged with confusion. Elena Martinez, she said, extending her hand. We spoke on the phone about my Honda. Right, the accident damage. Marcus wiped his hands on a shop rag before shaking hers, his grip firm and calloused. That was some storm couple weeks ago. Hope you weren't hurt too bad. Elena marveled at his ability to separate the woman in designer clothes standing in his shop from the bloodied accident victim he'd rescued. In this context, she was just another customer with car trouble, and the anonymity felt like a gift. I'm fine, thanks to a good Samaritan who happened to be driving by. She watched his face carefully, but Marcus showed no sign of connecting her to the woman from the highway. Well, let's take a look at what we're dealing with. Marcus walked around the Honda cataloging damage with the practiced eye of someone who'd been solving mechanical puzzles for 3 decades. Frame looks solid, which is good news. Most of this is cosmetic, but that front suspension took a hit. You're looking at maybe 3-4 days' work. As Marcus wrote up the estimate, Elena found herself studying his hands, the same hands that had pulled her from twisted metal 2 weeks ago. They were working hands, scarred and stained, but they moved with a surgeon's precision as he sketched out the repair plan. You can leave it today, if you want, Marcus offered. I can give you a loaner if you need transportation. Actually, I was hoping to wait while you worked on it, if that's okay. I have some reading to catch up on. Elena gestured to the leather briefcase that contained quarterly reports she had no intention of reading. Marcus looked surprised. It's just a garage, ma'am. Not much to do while you wait. Might be more comfortable somewhere else. I like garages, Elena replied and realized it was true. They're honest places. Things get fixed here. Something in her tone made Marcus look at her more carefully, as if seeing her for the first time. All right then. Coffee's terrible, but you're welcome to stick around. As Elena settled into a battered chair near Marcus's workbench, she felt a contentment she hadn't experienced in her penthouse overlooking the bay. Here, surrounded by the sounds of honest work and the smell of motor oil, she was just Elena Martinez, waiting for her car to be fixed by a man who'd already saved her life once without even knowing it. The second Friday, Elena brought her Honda to Reed's Auto for what she called preventive maintenance. Marcus began to suspect she was either the most cautious driver in Oakland or someone who enjoyed the company. The car was running perfectly. He'd done excellent work the first time, but she insisted on a full diagnostic check, oil change, and brake inspection. Better safe than sorry, Elena said, settling into the same worn chair beside his workbench. I do a lot of highway driving for work. Marcus had learned not to ask too many questions about customers' motivations. People had their reasons for the things they did, and his job was to fix cars, not solve mysteries. But there was something about Elena Martinez that intrigued him beyond the usual boundaries of professional courtesy. What kind of work keeps you on the road? He asked while checking her tire pressure, genuinely curious about this woman who dressed like a businesswoman but seemed to have infinite time for auto repair appointments. Consulting, Elena replied carefully. It wasn't entirely a lie. She did consult, just at the board level of her own company. I help businesses improve their operations. Over the following weeks, their Friday afternoon conversations developed a rhythm as comfortable as Marcus's work routine. Elena would arrive around 3 o'clock when the shop was quieter, and Marcus could focus on one project without constant interruptions. She'd bring coffee from the cafe down the street. Good coffee. Marcus noticed the kind that cost more than his usual gas station brew, and they'd talk while he worked. The conversation started safely orbiting around neutral topics like Oakland's changing neighborhoods, the weather's effect on car maintenance, and the challenge of running a small business in an increasingly corporate world. But gradually, like strangers sharing a long train journey, they began to reveal more personal truths. Marcus told her about Sarah, carefully testing Elena's reaction to the mention of his late wife. Elena listened with the focused attention of someone who understood loss, asking gentle questions that showed she grasped the difference between sympathy and empathy. When Marcus mentioned that he still wore his wedding ring, Elena nodded as if this made perfect sense. Love doesn't end just because life does, she said quietly. The people who matter to us become part of who we are. Elena shared her own carefully edited version of recent upheaval, a divorce from someone who didn't understand what commitment meant, the death of her father, the challenge of finding genuine connection in a world full of people who wanted something from her. She spoke in the generalities that had become second nature, protecting her true identity while revealing her authentic feelings. I used to think success was about achievement, Elena said one Friday, watching Marcus replace her perfectly functional air filter with the methodical care he brought to every task. But success without someone to share it with just feels like expensive loneliness. Marcus paused in his work, struck by the phrase. Expensive loneliness. Yeah, I can see that. Though my loneliness comes pretty cheap. He gestured around the modest shop with a self-deprecating smile. I don't think loneliness has a price tag, Elena replied. Pain is pain, whether you're crying in a mansion or a studio apartment. These philosophical exchanges felt like luxury to Marcus, who'd spent 3 years focused entirely on practical concerns, paying bills, raising Amy, keeping the shop running. The opportunity to discuss ideas beyond carburetor repair and college tuition reminded him of the man he'd been before grief narrowed his world to immediate necessities. Elena found herself looking forward to Friday afternoons with an anticipation that surprised her. In Marcus's garage, surrounded by the honest sounds of manual labor, she could drop the performance that executive life required. She didn't need to have answers to every question, solutions to every problem, or opinions on market trends and quarterly projections. She could simply be a woman talking to a man she found increasingly interesting. The physical attraction developed gradually, built on shared glances and accidental touches rather than dramatic gestures. When Marcus showed Elena how to check her oil level, their hands brushed as he guided hers to the dipstick. When she handed him tools without being asked, their fingers lingered in the exchange. When he laughed at her surprisingly sharp humor, she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the shop's space heaters. You're different than I expected, Marcus said one afternoon, accepting the coffee she'd brought him. Different how? Smarter, funnier, more. He searched for the word. More real than most people who wear suits as nice as yours. Elena looked down at her outfit, carefully chosen to suggest professional success without appearing ostentatious. Maybe expensive clothes don't always mean what people think they mean. Maybe not, Marcus agreed. Though I've got to say, whatever consulting that pays these days, it's a hell of a lot better than auto repair. Elena's guilt twisted sharply in her chest. The lies were becoming harder to maintain, especially as she found herself genuinely caring about Marcus's opinion of her. But how could she explain that her consulting involved making decisions that affected thousands of jobs, that her clothing budget exceeded his annual income, that she could buy his entire block without affecting her investment portfolio? The breakthrough came during their sixth Friday meeting when Elena noticed Marcus seemed distracted and stressed. His usual careful attention to her car felt perfunctory, and he kept glancing at papers on his desk with the expression of a man calculating impossible mathematics. "Everything okay?" Elena asked gently. Marcus hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Can I ask you something? As a consultant, I mean. If you were trying to save a small business that was struggling, what would you recommend?" Elena's heart rate quickened. This was dangerous territory. Her expertise in business strategy could easily expose her true identity. But Marcus needed help, and she found herself incapable of offering anything less than her best guidance. "What kind of struggling?" she asked carefully. "The kind where you love what you do, your customers love what you do, but the numbers just don't add up anymore. Where you're working harder than ever but falling further behind." Elena recognized the familiar pain of entrepreneurs who'd built their lives around passion projects that couldn't survive economic realities. "Is this theoretical or—" Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Not theoretical. This place has been in my family for 3 generations, but I'm starting to think I might be the one who loses it." The vulnerability in his admission made Elena's chest tight. Here was a man who took pride in solving everyone else's problems, admitting he couldn't solve his own. Without thinking, she reached out and covered his grease-stained hand with her manicured one. "Tell me everything," she said. "Maybe we can figure something out together." The first time Elena met Amy Reed, she was sitting in Marcus's office doing calculus homework while her father finished up Mrs. Patterson's brake job. Elena had arrived for her usual Friday appointment to find the teenage girl bent over equations that looked more complex than some business projections Elena had reviewed. "Dad's almost done," Amy said without looking up, her voice carrying the casual confidence of someone accustomed to managing adults. "He's just being extra careful because Mrs. P drives like she's still 18 and her reflexes haven't gotten the memo about being 73. Elena found herself smiling at the girl's matter-of-fact assessment. "That's very thoughtful of him. I'm Elena Martinez, by the way." "Amy Reed. And yeah, Dad's thoughtful about everything. Sometimes I think he worries more about his customers' safety than they do." Amy finally looked up, taking in Elena's appearance with the frank appraisal that only teenagers could manage. "You're the consulting lady, right? The one with the Honda that needs more maintenance than a Formula One car." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I believe in preventive care." "Uh-huh." Amy's expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced, but her tone remained friendly. "Dad says you're smart. He doesn't say that about many people. He says the same about you, something about Stanford and engineering dreams." Amy's face lit up with the kind of pure joy that reminded Elena why she'd once wanted children so desperately. "Stanford's been my dream since forever. Dad thinks I'm crazy for aiming so high, but he pretends to believe I can do it because that's the kind of dad he is." "And what kind of dad is that?" "The kind who learned to braid hair from YouTube videos and still can't get it right but keeps trying anyway. The kind who works 16-hour days so I can take piano lessons and play soccer and pretend we're not worried about money all the time." Elena's throat tightened at the casual way Amy discussed family struggles that clearly weighed heavily on her young shoulders. "He sounds like a good father." "The best," Amy said simply, "even when he's being overprotective and treating me like I'm still 12 instead of 17. Like this calculus homework, I could totally do it myself, but he insists on checking my work every night, even though I'm probably better at math than he is now." When Marcus emerged from the service bay, wiping his hands on a shop rag, he found Elena and Amy deep in conversation about differential equations. The sight of them together, his daughter animated and engaged Elena. Listening with genuine interest rather than polite tolerance created an unexpected warmth in his chest. Elena's really good at math, Dad, Amy announced. Like scary good. She explained derivatives in a way that actually makes sense. Marcus looked at Elena with renewed curiosity. Consulting requires a lot of math, I guess. More than you might think, Elena replied carefully. Numbers tell stories if you know how to read them. That conversation led to Elena staying for dinner when Amy casually invited her to their modest apartment above the Hernandez family restaurant. Dad's making his famous spaghetti and meatballs, Amy said with theatrical enthusiasm. And by famous, I mean it's the only thing he cooks that doesn't require calling the fire department. The Reed apartment was a testament to a man raising a teenage daughter on a mechanic's income. Mismatched furniture that was clean and comfortable, if not coordinated. Family photos covering every available surface, chronicling Amy's growth from gap-toothed child to confident young woman. Sarah's presence, everywhere in the books she'd loved, the plants she'd tended, the throw pillows, that somehow made the small space feel like home. Elena sat at their kitchen table watching Marcus move around the cramped space with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to cook out of necessity rather than passion. Amy helped without being asked, setting the table and preparing salad with the natural rhythm of established routine. So, Elena, Amy said while her father stirred sauce at the stove, what's your take on the college industrial complex and its role in perpetuating economic inequality? Marcus nearly dropped his wooden spoon. Amy, maybe let Elena eat before you start the political interrogation. It's okay, Elena laughed. Though that's quite a question for dinner conversation. Amy's planning to solve all the world's problems by the time she's 30, Marcus said with obvious pride, starting with educational reform and working her way up to global economic justice. Someone has to, Amy replied matter-of-factly. Our generation's inheriting a lot of messes from people who thought short-term profits were more important than long-term consequences. Elena found herself genuinely impressed by the teenager's intellectual intensity and moral clarity. What's your proposed solution? Make college affordable for everyone, but also create alternative pathways to success that don't require massive debt, Amy said, warming to her favorite topic. Like apprenticeship programs, community-based learning initiatives, technology training that's accessible to working families. Dad's got more practical intelligence than half the Stanford graduates I read about. But because he doesn't have a degree, the system treats him like he's not smart enough to matter. Marcus's face flushed slightly. Amy, Elena doesn't need to hear. Actually, I think Amy's absolutely right, Elena interrupted. Some of the smartest people I know learn their skills through experience rather than classroom theory. The dinner continued with Amy dominating the conversation while Marcus served remarkably good spaghetti and meatballs. Elena found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't experienced in years, drawn into the easy affection between father and daughter, the way they teased each other while clearly adoring each other completely. Dad, you should invite Elena to my soccer game tomorrow, Amy said as they cleared dishes, assuming she doesn't have important consulting emergencies to handle. Elena met Marcus's eyes across the small kitchen. I'd love to come if that's okay. And she's a midfielder, Marcus said with the pride of a man who'd never missed a game. Best one in the league, though I might be slightly biased. Completely biased, Amy corrected, but also completely right. The soccer game introduced Elena to Marcus's extended community in a way that highlighted everything she'd been missing in her isolated existence. Parents from diverse backgrounds united in their shared investment in their children's happiness. Grandparents who attended every game despite weather and aching joints. Siblings who cheered loudly and ate too much candy from the concession stand. Elena sat beside Marcus on the aluminum bleachers, watching Amy dominate the midfield with skill and determination that reminded her strongly of her father's approach to everything he did. When Amy scored the winning goal in the final minutes, Elena found herself on her feet, cheering as loudly as Marcus caught up in the pure joy of the moment. She gets that competitive drive from her mother, Marcus said as they watched Amy celebrate with her teammates. Sarah was the same way. Once she decided she wanted something, nothing could stop her. She's incredible, Elena said, meaning it completely. You're raising an amazing young woman. I'm trying. Some days I feel like I'm making it up as I go along, hoping I don't screw up anything too important. Elena thought about her own father who'd worked 18-hour days building his business empire, but had somehow never missed a school play or science fair. The fact that you worry about doing it right probably means you're doing it right. As they walked to the parking lot after the game, Amy fell into step between them, still glowing from her victory. Elena, you should come to more games. Dad gets lonely sitting by himself even though he pretends he doesn't. I do not get lonely, Marcus protested. I enjoy the peaceful solitude. Right, Amy said with teenage skepticism. That's why you talk to Mrs. Chen about her cats for 20 minutes after every game. Elena caught Marcus's embarrassed expression and felt a surge of affection for this man who'd opened his small, precious world to include her. I'd be honored to come to more games, she said, assuming Amy doesn't mind having extra cheering support. Are you kidding with you and Dad both yelling encouragement? I'll probably get recruited by professional teams just to escape the pressure. Walking to her Honda in the school parking lot, surrounded by the comfortable banter of a family that had just included her in their most important ritual, Elena felt something she thought was lost forever, the simple joy of belonging somewhere that money couldn't buy. The shift from friendship to something deeper happened gradually, like dawn breaking over the Oakland hills, so slowly that neither Marcus nor Elena could pinpoint the exact moment when their careful boundaries dissolved into something more honest and vulnerable. It began on a Thursday evening in late October when Elena found Marcus still working in the shop well past closing time, the overhead lights casting harsh shadows across his tired face. She'd stopped by to drop off some research she'd compiled about small business loans, carefully sourced information that could help, without revealing her true expertise, and found him staring at a stack of bills with the expression of a man doing impossible arithmetic. The bank called today, Marcus said without preamble, not bothering to hide the papers as he usually did when discussing financial troubles. They want to schedule a meeting about the mortgage. That's never good news. Elena set down the folder of loan information and sat in her usual chair, studying Marcus's face in the yellow fluorescent light. 3 months of Friday afternoons had taught her to read his moods, to distinguish between the focused concentration of complex repairs and the bone-deep weariness that came from worrying about problems that couldn't be fixed with the right tools and enough determination. How bad is it? She asked gently. Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. 3 months behind on the mortgage, 2 months on the utility bills, and Amy's college application fees are due next week. I've got $847 in the checking account and about $12,000 worth of work scheduled for next month, assuming none of it falls through. The numbers hit Elena like physical blows. $12,000 was less than she typically spent on a single business dinner. But for Marcus, it represented the difference between keeping his family legacy alive and losing everything his father and grandfather had built. There might be options, Elena said carefully, gesturing to the folder she'd brought. Government programs, community development loans, things that might buy you some time to stabilize. Marcus picked up the folder, flipping through pages of meticulously organized information that would have taken most people weeks to compile. Elena, how did you put this together so fast? I have good research skills, she replied, which was true as far as it went. What she didn't mention was the team of analysts she'd tasked with finding every possible resource available to small business owners in Marcus's situation. Good research skills, Marcus repeated, studying her face with new intensity. You know, sometimes I feel like you're not telling me everything about yourself. Elena's heart rate spiked. What do you mean? I mean, you're the most overqualified consultant I've ever met. You talk about business IFA strategy like someone who's actually run companies, not just advised them. You understand financial structures that most MBA graduates would struggle with. And you seem to have unlimited time to spend in my garage, which makes me wonder what kind of consulting work gives you that much flexibility. The moment stretched between them, loaded with the weight of 3 months of carefully constructed half-truths. Elena could feel the relationship balanced on a knife's edge, one honest answer away from becoming something real, or one more deflection away from remaining forever artificial. You're right, Elena said quietly. I haven't been completely honest about my work situation. Marcus set down the folder, his attention completely focused on her face. Okay, the truth is I'm between major projects right now. I have enough saved up that I can be selective about what I take on next. And I've been spending time here because She took a breath. Because you and Amy have become important to me, more important than I expected. It wasn't the complete truth, but it was more honesty than Elena had offered anyone in years. Marcus studied her face, seeming to weigh her words against his own instincts about the woman who'd become such a central part of his life. Important how? He asked softly. Elena felt the last of her professional composure crumble. Important like I think about our Friday conversations all week. Important like Amy's soccer games have become the highlight of my weekends. Important like I haven't felt this hopeful about anything in years. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his calloused hands resting on the workbench between them. Elena, I need you to know something. I love Sarah completely. She was my best friend, my partner, the mother of my child. Part of me is always going to love her. I know, Elena said. I would never ask you to stop loving her. That love is part of who you are, and who you are is why I... She stopped suddenly, terrified of the words she was about to speak. Why you what? Why I'm falling in love with you, Elena whispered. The admission hung in the air between them like smoke from a just extinguished candle. Marcus reached across the workbench and took her hands in his thumbs tracing over her knuckles with the same careful attention he brought to precision engine work. I thought I was done with this, Marcus said quietly. After Sarah died, I figured I'd had my chance at love, and that was enough for one lifetime. But you make me remember what it feels like to want something more than just getting through each day. Their first kiss happened over the cluttered workbench of Reed's Auto Repair, surrounded by the honest smell of motor oil and the soft hum of fluorescent lights. It was tentative at first, then deeper as 3 months of careful restraint finally found release. Elena had been kissed by men who calculated the gesture's strategic value, but Marcus kissed her like she was the answer to a question he'd been afraid to ask. This is complicated, Marcus said when they broke apart. Everything worthwhile is complicated, Elena replied, still tasting the salt and sweetness of honest affection. The weeks that followed brought a new intimacy to their relationship built on shared vulnerabilities rather than shared activities. Marcus told Elena about the night Sarah died, how he'd held her hand in the hospital, and promised to take care of Amy no matter what it cost him. Elena shared her own losses, her father's death, her failed marriage, the children she'd never been able to carry to term. I used to think my worth was measured by what I could produce, Elena said one evening as they walked through Oakland's Lake Merritt after one of Amy's games. Business results, charitable donations, measurable impacts. But with you and Amy, I matter just because I show up, just because I care. Marcus stopped walking and turned to face her, the lake's surface reflecting the city lights behind them. Elena, you need to understand something. I can't give you the life you're probably used to. I can't afford fancy restaurants or expensive vacations or whatever women in your position expect from relationships. Elena thought about her empty penthouse, her designer wardrobe, her investment portfolio that generated more income each month than Marcus made in a year. What if I told you that the life I'm used to hasn't made me happy? What if I told you that standing here with you right now is the most valuable thing I've experienced in years? I'd say you might be romanticizing the situation, Marcus replied with the practical honesty she'd come to love. Poverty isn't noble, Elena. It's just hard. And wealth isn't automatically fulfilling, Elena countered. It's just lonely. Their relationship deepened through small moments rather than grand gestures. Marcus teaching Elena to change a tire in the shop's parking lot, his hands guiding hers as she learned to feel the difference between properly tightened and over-tightened lug nuts. Elena helping Amy with college application essays, drawing on experiences she couldn't fully explain to help the teenager articulate her dreams with clarity and passion. You're different when Elena's around, Amy observed one evening after Elena had left following dinner and homework help. More like how I remember you being before Mom got sick. Marcus paused in washing dishes, considering his daughter's assessment. How do you mean happier? Like you remember that you're allowed to enjoy things instead of just surviving them. The observation stayed with Marcus as he lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling of the small apartment he'd shared with Sarah and now shared with Amy. For 3 years, he'd been living in maintenance mode, keeping the business running, keeping Amy fed and housed and educated, keeping himself functional enough to meet his responsibilities. But Elena had somehow reminded him that life could include joy as well as duty, hope as well as obligation. When Elena stayed for dinner the following Friday, remaining late enough to help put Amy to bed and share a beer with Marcus on their small balcony overlooking the neighborhood, the evening felt like a preview of a possible future. Not the future Marcus had originally planned with Sarah, but a different kind of happiness built on second chances and the courage to love again despite knowing how much it could hurt to lose someone. I need to tell you something, Elena said as they sat in comfortable silence, watching Oakland settle into night around them. Marcus felt his chest tighten with familiar anxiety. In his experience, conversations that began that way rarely ended well. I'm scared, Elena continued, not of you, but of this, of caring about someone so much that losing them would break me. I haven't let myself feel this vulnerable in years. Marcus reached for her hand, interlacing their fingers with the natural ease that had developed between them. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. But Elena, what if instead of being scared of losing each other, we focused on what we could build together? Looking out over the modest neighborhood that had become her second home, Elena felt something she'd thought was lost forever. The simple faith that tomorrow might be better than today, not because of what she could buy or achieve, but because of who she'd chosen to share it with. Elena's first covert intervention happened almost by accident, driven by panic rather than careful planning. She'd been leaving Marcus's shop after their usual Friday appointment when she overheard him on the phone with First National Bank, his voice tight with the particular stress that came from trying to negotiate with institutions that dealt in numbers rather than human circumstances. I understand your position, Marcus was saying, his back turned to Elena as she paused near her Honda. But 3 months doesn't seem like enough time to catch up given the current business climate. Yes, I understand the terms of the mortgage agreement. No, I don't have any immediate way to bring the account current. Elena had intended to leave to respect Marcus's privacy and avoid the awkwardness of witnessing his financial humiliation. But something in his voice, a note of defeat that she'd never heard before, made her feet stop moving. She stood frozen beside her car, listening to the man she was falling in love with discuss the potential loss of everything his family had built over 3 generations. After Marcus hung up, Elena sat in her Honda for 10 minutes, hands shaking as she calculated the mathematics of assistance. The shop's mortgage balance was probably around $180,000 based on Oakland commercial real estate values. The monthly payments that Marcus was struggling with represented less than Elena spent on a single charity gala dress. The gap between his world and hers had never felt more absurd or more painful. That night, Elena made her first anonymous donation to Reed's Auto Repair. Working through a complex network of shell companies and legal intermediaries that Grace Chen helped establish, Elena arranged for a community business support grant to pay 3 months of the shop's mortgage directly to First National Bank. The documentation looked official enough to pass casual scrutiny, a small foundation supporting working-class businesses affected by economic downturns. Marcus's confusion when he received the bank's notification was exactly what Elena had hoped for and dreaded. He called the foundation's listed number actually a law firm Elena had retained, spoke to people who knew enough about the supposed program to answer basic questions, and eventually accepted the grant as an unexpected stroke of luck rather than charity. I can't believe it. Marcus told Elena the following Friday, his relief so palpable it made her chest ache. Some foundation I've never heard of decided to pay my back mortgage. 3 months breathing room, just like that. Elena smiled and made appropriate surprised noises, while guilt twisted in her stomach like a live thing. The joy on Marcus's face was genuine and beautiful, and built on a lie she was actively constructing. The success of the first intervention made the second one easier to justify. When Elena learned that Amy needed $500 for college application fees, a sum that represented groceries for a month in the Reed household, she arranged for a merit-based application fee waiver through another carefully constructed foundation. Amy's academic record made her a legitimate candidate for such assistance. Elena reasoned, even though the assistance existed only because Elena had created it specifically for her. "Dad, you're not going to believe this," Amy announced over dinner on a Tuesday evening when Elena happened to be joining them. "I got selected for this application fee waiver program. All my college applications are free now." Marcus's face showed the complex emotions of a proud father who was also a practical man struggling with money. "That's incredible, sweetheart. You must have really impressed them with your academic record. I guess so, Amy said, but Elena caught the teenager studying her with speculative eyes. Amy Reed was too intelligent not to notice patterns, and Elena suddenly worried that her assistance might be more transparent than she'd intended. The equipment replacements began in November when Elena noticed that Marcus was spending more time fixing his own tools than using them to repair customers' cars. His hydraulic lift had been making ominous grinding noises for weeks, and Elena could see the stress in Marcus's shoulders every time he had to use it. Elena researched commercial auto equipment suppliers until she found one that was phasing out older inventory. She arranged for Reed's auto repair machine to be randomly selected for a customer appreciation upgrade program, older equipment traded for newer models at no charge, supposedly to build brand loyalty and generate referrals. Elena, this is the third piece of good luck I've had in 2 months, Marcus said the Friday after the new lift was installed. I'm starting to think maybe the universe is trying to tell me something. Maybe it's telling you that good people deserve good things. Elena replied, hating herself for the easy lie while loving the way Marcus's whole body seemed to relax when he wasn't constantly worried about equipment failures. The customer referrals were Elena's most sophisticated operation, requiring coordination with Grace Chen and several of Elena's business contacts. Elena identified other small business owners in the Bay Area who needed reliable auto repair executives whose assistants handled car maintenance entrepreneurs, who valued honest service over convenience professionals who would appreciate Marcus's integrity and skill. Elena never directly recommended Reed's auto repair, but she made sure Marcus's name came up in conversations about trustworthy mechanics. She arranged for business cards to be left in strategic locations for positive online reviews to be written by actual customers she'd quietly directed to the shop. Within 6 weeks, Marcus's appointment book was fuller than it had been in 2 years. I don't understand what's happening, Marcus confided to Elena as they watched Amy's soccer practice from the sidelines. Business has picked up so much, I'm thinking about hiring help for the first time since Sarah got sick. It's like everything is suddenly going right. Elena squeezed his hand, feeling the weight of deception settle heavier on her shoulders with each success. You deserve success, Marcus. Maybe people are finally recognizing the quality of your work. The Stanford Scholarship was Elena's most elaborate creation and her biggest mistake. She'd watched Amy's face when the teenager calculated the true cost of her dream education, tuition, housing, books, living expenses, that totaled more than Marcus's annual income. Elena had seen similar dreams die under financial reality too many times to let it happen to Amy Reed. Working through the Vasquez Foundation's education initiative, Elena created a scholarship program for first-generation college students pursuing engineering degrees. The criteria were written specifically to match Amy's profile, but the program was real enough to withstand scrutiny, funded with $2 million and administered by legitimate educational professionals. When Amy received the Stanford Scholarship notification, her scream of joy could be heard 3 blocks away. Marcus cried the first time Elena had seen him lose emotional control, and Amy called everyone she knew to share the news that her impossible dream had become possible. This changes everything, Marcus told Elena that evening as they sat on his small balcony, Amy inside making celebratory phone calls to friends and teachers. She's going to Stanford, Elena. My daughter is going to one of the best universities in the world. Elena watched Marcus's face glow with pride and felt her heart break a little more. The scholarship was real. Amy had earned it through her academic excellence and personal character, but Elena had essentially bought her way into this family's joy. Every smile, every grateful hug, every expression of love was now built on a foundation of deception that grew more complex with each act of assistance. I need to ask you something, Marcus said, his voice suddenly serious. All this good fortune, the grant, the equipment, the new customers, Amy's scholarship, it's incredible, but it's also pretty coincidental. Things like this don't usually happen to people like me. Elena's throat constricted. What are you saying? I'm saying that sometimes when things seem too good to be true, it's because they are. And I need to know that what we have together is real, not just another piece of good luck that's going to disappear when I wake up. Elena looked into Marcus's eyes, honest, trusting, already beginning to show the first shadows of suspicion, and made a choice that would haunt her for weeks to come. Marcus, what we have is the most real thing in my life, she said, which was completely true. Everything else is just Timing. Good timing that you've earned through years of hard work and integrity. Marcus studied her face for a long moment, then nodded as if accepting her explanation. But Elena caught something in his expression that hadn't been there before, a small seed of doubt that would grow in the weeks to come, fed by inconsistencies she couldn't explain and questions she couldn't answer honestly. As they sat together on the balcony, listening to Amy's joyful conversations and watching Oakland settle into night, around them Elena realized she had created an impossible situation. Her help was genuine, her love was real, but the foundation of their relationship was built on lies that grew more elaborate with each passing day. She was giving Marcus and Amy everything they needed to succeed while simultaneously destroying the trust that made their love possible. The irony was crushing. Elena had the power to solve all of Marcus's problems, but using that power would inevitably cost her the only thing money couldn't buy, their authentic love for the woman they thought she was, rather than the billionaire she actually was. The first crack in Elena's carefully constructed facade appeared on a Tuesday evening in early December, when Amy Reed's natural curiosity collided with the digital age's inability to keep secrets. Elena had stayed for dinner again, helping Amy with a college essay about overcoming economic obstacles while Marcus worked late in the shop below. The scene felt domestic and perfect until Amy decided to research her scholarship benefactor. "I want to write a thank you letter to the Vasquez Foundation." Amy announced, her laptop open on the kitchen table beside her half-finished calculus homework. "It's only right to thank the people who made my dreams possible." Elena felt her blood pressure spike but kept her voice carefully neutral. "That's very thoughtful of you." "Look at this," Amy said, turning her laptop screen toward Elena. "The Vasquez Foundation has given away almost $1 billion in the last decade. Education, healthcare, environmental programs. Elena, did you know they funded the new pediatric wing at Oakland Children's Hospital?" Elena's mouth went dry. The hospital wing had been one of her father's final projects, completed just months before his death. "Really, that's impressive. And look at the board of directors." Amy continued, scrolling through the foundation's website with the determined focus she brought to all research projects. "Elena Vasquez, chairwoman and CEO. She's around your age, Elena. That's such a weird coincidence you both have the same first name." Elena forced herself to lean forward and look at the screen where her own professional headshot stared back at her. The formal portrait taken for the foundation's annual report, her hair styled differently, wearing the kind of severe business suit she never wore to Oakland. For a terrifying moment, she thought Amy might recognize her, but the teenager was focused on reading the biographical information below the photo. She inherited the foundation from her father, Roberto Vasquez, who started Vasquez Technologies. Amy read aloud. "The company employs over 50,000 people worldwide and specializes in artificial intelligence and sustainable energy solutions. Elena Vasquez has a net worth estimated at $2.3 billion, making her one of the youngest female billionaires in tech." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs as Amy absorbed this information, the teenager's brilliant mind working through implications that Elena prayed wouldn't occur to her. "Elena," Amy said slowly, "isn't it weird that a billionaire would create a scholarship that seems designed exactly for someone like me, first-generation college student, pursuing engineering financial need? It's like she knew my specific situation." "Great minds think alike," Elena suggested weakly. Maybe she had similar experiences growing up. Amy scrolled further down the page, reading about Elena's background. No, look, she grew up wealthy. Private schools, Harvard MBA, inherited billions. She's never experienced financial struggle. Amy paused, her expression thoughtful. Though it says here she's been married and divorced, no children. Maybe that's why she focuses on helping kids achieve their educational dreams. Elena nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Amy was building a narrative that explained the scholarship without questioning Elena's presence in their lives, but each word felt like a knife twist of guilt. "I'm definitely writing that thank you letter," Amy decided, closing the laptop. "People with that much money probably never hear from the individuals they help. She should know that her generosity changed someone's actual life." Over the following weeks, Elena noticed Marcus paying closer attention to details he'd previously accepted without question. Her car needed fewer repairs than any Honda in automotive history, yet she continued bringing it for maintenance every Friday. Her knowledge of business strategy seemed sophisticated for someone doing freelance consulting. Her clothes, while not obviously expensive, were consistently well-made and perfectly tailored. "Elena," Marcus said one Friday afternoon as he performed yet another unnecessary oil change on her perfectly maintained Honda, "can I ask you something personal?" Elena's pulse quickened. "Of course. What kind of consulting do you actually do? I mean specifically. Because you talk about business like someone who's run major operations, not just advised them." Elena had prepared for this question, but Marcus's direct gaze made her rehearsed answers feel inadequate. "I work with companies on organizational efficiency, strategic planning, that kind of thing." "For how long?" "About 15 years. Another careful truth: she'd been involved in business strategy since college. "And you work independently. No firm affiliation." "I prefer the flexibility of independent work." Also true, though not in the way Marcus understood it. Marcus nodded, but Elena could see him filing away her responses, comparing them to previous conversations, looking for patterns. His mechanic's mind worked the same way whether he was diagnosing engine trouble or relationship inconsistencies, methodically, patiently, until the truth revealed itself. The breaking point came during Amy's winter break, when Elena made the mistake of offering too much help with too much knowledge. Amy was struggling with a complex calculus problem, and Elena found herself explaining mathematical concepts with the fluency of someone who'd used advanced mathematics in real-world applications for decades. "Elena, where did you learn to do differential equations like that?" Amy asked, staring at the elegant solution Elena had sketched out. "College mathematics," Elena replied, which was true, but incomplete. "What kind of college mathematics?" "Because I'm taking AP Calculus, supposedly the most advanced math available at my high school, and you just solve problems that look more advanced than what my Stanford-bound friends are studying." Marcus looked up from his paperwork, his attention now fully focused on the conversation. Elena felt trapped between two brilliant minds who were starting to ask questions she couldn't answer without revealing everything. "I've always been good with numbers," Elena said lamely. "Good with numbers doesn't explain that level of mathematical sophistication," Amy pressed. "Elena, what did you study in college? What degree do you have?" Elena's carefully constructed world felt like it was collapsing in real time. "Business administration," she said, which was technically accurate for her Harvard MBA. "Undergraduate or graduate?" Marcus asked quietly. "Both," Elena admitted. "Where?" Elena hesitated a moment too long. "Northwestern," she lied, naming the school where she'd given a guest lecture but never studied. Amy and Marcus exchanged glances. Elena realized that her hesitation had been more revealing than any answer she could have given. The newspaper arrived on Marcus's doorstep every morning at 6:30 a.m., usually ignored until evening when he had time to scan the headlines over dinner. But Friday morning, December 18th, the front page of the Bay Area Business Journal contained a photograph that made Marcus drop his coffee mug on the kitchen floor. "Tech heiress Elena Vasquez announces major foundation restructuring," read the headline above a full-color photo of Elena standing at a podium addressing what appeared to be a room full of business executives. She wore a navy blue suit that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly mortgage payment, her hair styled in a sophisticated updo he'd never seen her entire bearing, radiating the kind of authority that came from controlling billions of dollars. Marcus sat heavily in his kitchen chair, the newspaper trembling in his hands as he read the article's devastating details. Vasquez Technologies CEO Elena Vasquez announced yesterday that the Vasquez Foundation will redirect $500 million towards supporting small businesses affected by economic inequality. The initiative, according to Vasquez, reflects her personal commitment to bridging the gap between technology sector prosperity and working-class struggles. "I've spent the past year learning about the challenges facing everyday entrepreneurs," Vasquez told attendees at the San Francisco Marriott. "The disconnect between Silicon Valley wealth and community needs has become unconscionable. It's time for those of us with resources to take meaningful action." The Foundation's new direction represents a significant shift for the organization, which has previously focused primarily on education and healthcare initiatives. Industry analysts suggest the change reflects Vasquez's personal evolution, following her highly publicized divorce from political strategist Richard Cross in the death of her father, Vasquez Technologies founder Roberto Vasquez. At 47, Elena Vasquez controls a technology empire worth an estimated $8.2 billion, making her one of the youngest female CEOs in the Fortune 500. Her personal net worth of $2.3 billion places her among the wealthiest individuals in California. Marcus read the article 3 times each pass, revealing new layers of deception that made his chest feel hollow. The woman he'd fallen in love with, Elena Martinez, freelance consultant, didn't exist. In her place was Elena Vasquez, billionaire technology heiress, who apparently viewed his life as a sociological experiment in bridging gaps and meaningful action. The photograph that accompanied the article showed Elena at a charity gala from the previous month, the same night she told Marcus she was working late on a consulting project. She stood beside San Francisco's mayor and 2 tech entrepreneurs Marcus recognized from magazine covers, looking completely at home in a world of wealth and power that made Marcus's entire existence seem quaint by comparison. Amy found him still sitting at the kitchen table an hour later, the newspaper spread before him like evidence at a crime scene. "Dad, you okay? You're going to be late opening the shop." Marcus looked up at his daughter, brilliant, trusting Amy, who'd written thank you letters to the Vasquez Foundation without knowing she was writing to the woman who'd been sharing their dinner table for months. "Amy, sit down. We need to talk." Amy's expression shifted to concern as she saw the newspaper. "What's wrong?" Marcus turned the paper toward her, pointing to Elena's photograph. "Look at this article. Look at the picture." Amy leaned forward, her eyes scanning the headline and image. Marcus watched recognition dawn on her face like a slow-motion explosion. That's Elena," Amy whispered. "But that can't be right. The article says this woman is a billionaire. That's not our Elena." "Read it," Marcus said quietly. Amy read the article with calm, methodical focus she brought to her calculus homework, her expression growing more shocked with each paragraph. When she finished, she looked up at Marcus with tears in her eyes. "Dad, she lied to us about everything. Her name, her job, her whole life. She's the person who gave me the scholarship. She's been playing some kind of game with our lives." Marcus felt something fundamental crack inside his chest. "Yeah, that's what it looks like." "But why?" Amy's voice cracked with the particular pain of teenage betrayal. "Why would someone with billions of dollars pretend to be something else? Why would she lie to people who—" Amy couldn't finish the sentence, but Marcus heard the unspoken words, "people who loved her." Marcus stared at the photograph of Elena Vasquez, CEO and philanthropist, trying to reconcile this polished executive with the woman who'd sat in his garage for months, who'd cheered at Amy's soccer games, who'd kissed him over his workbench, surrounded by the honest smell of motor oil. Had any of it been real? Or had she been studying them like specimens in some elaborate experiment about class differences in economic inequality? "I don't know why," Marcus said finally, "but I'm going to find out." The worst part was the mathematical precision of her deception. Elena Vasquez could have bought Reed's auto repair with pocket change, could have paid Amy's entire Stanford tuition without affecting her quarterly investment returns, could have solved every financial problem in Marcus's life with the equivalent of loose change from her perspective. Instead, she'd chosen to help secretly, while lying about her identity, turning their gratitude into unwitting participation in her deception. Marcus folded the newspaper carefully, his hands steady despite the rage building in his chest. Elena Martinez, freelance consultant, had been the perfect woman for Marcus Reed, working-class mechanic. But Elena Vasquez, billionaire heiress, was something else entirely, a stranger who'd been playing house with people whose entire lives represented less than a rounding error in her investment portfolio. Elena arrived at Reed's auto repair that Friday afternoon, carrying coffee and wearing the kind of understated elegance that Marcus now recognized as probably costing more than most people's cars. She'd been looking forward to this meeting all week. Marcus had seemed distant during their brief phone conversation on Tuesday, and she'd hoped that spending time together would restore the easy intimacy they'd built over the past 4 months. Instead, she found Marcus waiting for her beside her Honda Civic, the Bay Area Business Journal, spread across the hood like an accusation. Elena's steps faltered as she saw her own photograph staring back at her, the formal portrait from last week's foundation announcement, her professional mask firmly in place, surrounded by the trappings of wealth and power she'd worked so hard to keep hidden from this man and his daughter. "Elena Vasquez," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying a tone she'd never heard before. Cold, distant, completely unlike the warm greeting she'd grown accustomed to expecting. Or should I say Ms. Vasquez? I'm not sure what the proper protocol is when addressing a billionaire who's been lying to you for 4 months. Elena's throat constricted. She'd known this moment would come, eventually had even rehearsed explanations during sleepless nights. But facing Marcus's wounded expression made all her prepared words evaporate. Marcus, I can explain. Can you? Marcus picked up the newspaper, his hands steady, despite the anger radiating from every line of his body. Can you explain why Elena Vasquez, CEO of a technology empire worth $8.2 billion, has been pretending to be Elena Martinez, freelance consultant? Can you explain why you've been studying me and Amy like we're some kind of sociological experiment? It wasn't like that, Elena said desperately. Please, just let me tell you. Tell me what more or less. Marcus's voice rose slightly, 3 months of suppressed frustration, finally finding outlet. Tell me why someone with your net worth needed weekly car maintenance on a Honda that's in perfect condition. Tell me why you have unlimited time to spend in my garage when you're apparently running board meetings and managing foundations. Elena's carefully constructed defenses crumbled under Marcus's methodical interrogation. I wanted to know you, the real you, not the version of you that would have seen my money instead of seeing me. Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. The real me, Elena, you've never given me the chance to know the real you. Everything about our relationship has been based on a lie you created. Not everything, Elena protested. My feelings for you are real. My love for Amy is real. The person I am when I'm with you, that's the most honest I've ever been with anyone. Honest? Marcus's voice turned incredulous. You call this honest, Elena? I've been falling in love with someone who doesn't exist. Elena Martinez was broke up, but Elena Vasquez could buy and sell my entire life without affecting her quarterly budget. The accusation hit Elena like a physical blow. That's not fair. Money doesn't define who I am. Doesn't it? Marcus gestured around the modest shop, his father's legacy that Elena could have purchased as an impulse buy. Because from where I'm standing, money defines everything about who you are. It defines why you can afford to play house with working-class families. It defines why you can create fake scholarships and mysterious grants and business opportunities that just happen to solve all our problems. Elena's face went white. How did you? Amy's not stupid, Elena. Neither am I. All those coincidences, the perfectly timed assistance, the foundation that seemed designed specifically for Amy's situation. Marcus's voice carried the particular pain of someone who'd believed in miracles only to discover they were manufactured. You bought your way into our lives, and you made us grateful for it. I was trying to help, Elena said weakly. Help, Marcus stepped closer, his eyes blazing with hurt and anger. Or were you trying to feel better about yourself? Because that's what this looks like from my perspective. A billionaire who got bored with her empty life and decided to play family with some poor people who would be appropriately grateful for her generosity. That's not what this was, Elena said, tears streaming down her face. Marcus, I love you. I love Amy. You have to believe that. I don't know what to believe anymore, Marcus replied. How can I trust anything you've told me when your entire identity has been a lie? How can I believe your feelings are real when you've been manipulating our lives from the beginning? Elena reached toward him, but Marcus stepped back, the rejection like a knife through her chest. You don't understand what it's like to live my life, Elena. To never know if people see you or just see what you can do for them. With you, I could just be a woman falling in love. No, Marcus interrupted. You could be a woman pretending to fall in love while secretly controlling every aspect of our relationship. There's a difference, Elena, a pretty significant one. The accusation hung between them in the late afternoon light filtering through the shop's windows. Elena could see everything she'd built with Marcus and Amy crumbling, destroyed not by external forces, but by her own desperate attempt to experience authentic love through inauthentic means. So what happens now? Elena asked quietly. Marcus looked at her for a long moment, his expression cycling through anger, hurt, and something that might have been grief for the relationship they'd never actually had. Now you go back to your real life, Marcus said finally, and Amy and I figure out how to clean up the mess you made of ours. Elena stood in the shop that had become her sanctuary, watching the man she loved dismiss her from the only place she'd ever felt like she belonged. The irony was crushing, She had enough money to buy anything in the world except the one thing she wanted most. Marcus Reed's trust freely given, never to be withdrawn. Marcus, please. Goodbye, Elena, Marcus said, turning away from her and walking toward the office where Amy was probably doing homework, pretending not to overhear the conversation that was ending their unlikely family before it had ever really begun. Elena stood alone in the garage for several minutes, surrounded by the tools and equipment she'd secretly replaced, breathing in the motor oil and metal polish that had become the scent of home. Then she walked to her Honda Civic, perfectly maintained, despite months of fictional problems, and drove away from Reed's Auto Repair for what she knew would be the last time. The silence in Reed's Auto Repair felt like a living thing in the hours after Elena's departure. Marcus stood in the empty garage, staring at the workbench where they'd shared their first kiss, trying to reconcile the memory of that moment with the knowledge that it had been built on a foundation of lies. The coffee Elena had brought, expensive Ethiopian blend that he'd grown to prefer over his usual gas station brew, sat untouched and growing cold, a small reminder of how thoroughly she'd infiltrated even his most basic daily routines. Amy emerged from the office where she'd been pretending to study, her face streaked with tears and her usual teenage composure completely shattered. At 17, she'd experienced the normal disappointments of adolescence: failed tests, friend drama, soccer losses, but nothing had prepared her for the particular devastation of discovering that someone she'd come to love, like a mother, had been lying about everything. Dad, Amy said, her voice small and broken in a way that made Marcus's chest ache. Was any of it real? When she helped me with calculus, when she came to my games, when she made dinner with us, was she just pretending the whole time? Marcus pulled his daughter into a hug, feeling her shoulders shake with suppressed sobs. At 17, Amy was almost an adult, but in this moment she felt like the little girl who used to crawl into his bed during thunderstorms, seeking comfort from a father who was supposed to have answers to impossible questions. I don't know, sweetheart, Marcus admitted. I really don't know. The truth was that Marcus couldn't separate Elena's genuine moments from her calculated deceptions. Had her laughter at Amy's jokes been real or performance? When she'd listened to his stories about Sarah with tears in her eyes, had she been experiencing authentic emotion or practicing the kind of empathy that billionaires probably learned in leadership seminars? The uncertainty was almost worse than the betrayal itself. Word of Elena's true identity spread through their small community with the speed that only devastating gossip could achieve. By Monday morning, everyone in the Fruitvale neighborhood knew that Marcus Reed had been dating a billionaire without knowing it. The reactions ranged from amazement to amusement to pity, but all of them made Marcus feel like a character in someone else's story rather than the protagonist of his own life. Man, I can't believe you didn't know, Miguel Santos said Tuesday afternoon, bringing his delivery truck in for a routine brake check. I mean, didn't you think it was weird that she never talked about money problems? Every woman I've ever dated has complained about bills at least once. Mrs. Chen, whose ancient Toyota had been running perfectly since Elena's coincidental customer referrals brought better business to the shop, offered a different perspective. Maybe she really did care about you, Marcus. Rich people can love too, can't they? But it was Father Rodriguez who asked the question that kept Marcus awake at night. What if her feelings were genuine, but she thought you wouldn't accept them if you knew the truth about her circumstances? The suggestion that Elena might have lied out of fear rather than malice was somehow more painful than simple deception. It implied that Marcus's own pride and prejudices had created the very barriers that made Elena's deception feel necessary. But how could he trust someone who demonstrated such extraordinary capacity for sustained dishonesty? Amy's response to the revelation was more complex than simple anger. The teenager who'd been planning her Stanford future with grateful excitement now questioned every aspect of her acceptance in scholarship. She spent hours researching the Vasquez Foundation's other recipients, trying to determine if her academic achievements had genuinely earned the award, or if Alana had simply bought her way into their family's gratitude. What if I only got the scholarship because she wanted to impress you? Amy asked during a sleepless conversation at 2 a.m. when neither of them could stop replaying conversations and looking for clues they'd missed. What if I'm not actually smart enough for Stanford? What if everything I thought I'd achieved was just charity? Marcus had no answer for his daughter's crisis of confidence. Elena's deception had poisoned not just their relationship, but Amy's faith in her own capabilities. The scholarship money was real. The Stanford acceptance was genuine, but Amy's joy in her accomplishments had been tainted by the knowledge that Elena Vasquez could have arranged opportunities that Amy Reed would never have access through merit alone. The financial implications of Elena's departure became apparent within days. The mysterious customer referrals stopped arriving. The equipment that had been upgraded through warranty programs started showing signs of the age and wear that Elena's money had temporarily disguised. Most painfully, Marcus realized he'd grown accustomed to a level of financial stability that had never been sustainable for Reed's Auto Repair without Elena's invisible assistance. "We're back where we started," Marcus told Amy as they reviewed the shop's books Thursday evening. "Except now, we know what it feels like to not worry about money. That might actually be worse." Amy looked at the numbers with the mathematical precision she'd inherited from both parents. Dad, without those customer referrals, were going to lose the shop anyway. Elena's help just delayed the inevitable. The cruelest irony was that Elena's brief presence in their lives had given Marcus and Amy a glimpse of possibilities they'd never imagined. Amy at Stanford, the shop thriving, Marcus sleeping peacefully without calculating bill payment schedules in his head. Now those dreams felt like cruel previews of a life they'd never actually been meant to live. Local media attention made everything worse. The Bay Area Business Journal had picked up the story of the billionaire heiress in the Oakland mechanic, turning Marcus and Amy's private pain into public entertainment. Reporters called the shop asking for interviews about cross-class romance and economic inequality in relationships. Marcus stopped answering the phone. "This is exactly what she was afraid of," Amy observed with the insight that sometimes made her seem far older than 17. "Elena probably knew this would happen if people found out. That's why she lied." But understanding Elena's motivations didn't heal the damage her deception had caused. If anything, it made Marcus feel worse, like a man whose own limitations had forced someone he loved to choose between honesty and happiness, and who'd proven her fears justified by ending their relationship the moment he learned the truth. The first signs of Marcus's unraveling were subtle, longer hours at the shop despite having fewer customers, beer with dinner, instead of coffee conversations with Amy that felt strained and careful where they'd once been natural and easy. But as December stretched into January, the changes became impossible to ignore. Marcus had always been a man who solved problems through action. When Sarah got sick, he'd work double shifts to pay for treatments. When Amy needed college guidance, he'd researched universities and application strategies with methodical determination. But Elena's betrayal presented a problem that couldn't be fixed with the right tools and enough effort. The woman he'd fallen in love with had never existed, and the woman who did exist inhabited a world so far removed from his own that their brief intersection felt like a mathematical impossibility. The drinking started as a single beer after work, a small comfort at the end of days that felt increasingly meaningless. But one beer became two, then three, until Marcus found himself sitting in his small apartment at 10 p.m. working through a six-pack while staring at his phone and fighting the urge to call Elena's number. He deleted her contact information twice, only to realize he'd memorized the number anyway. "Dad, you're scaring me," Amy said one Thursday evening when she found him asleep at the kitchen table surrounded by empty bottles and unpaid bills. "This isn't like you." Marcus woke with the disorientation of someone whose sleep patterns had been destroyed by alcohol and anxiety. "I'm fine, sweetheart, just tired." But Amy was too intelligent to accept easy reassurances. She'd watched her mother die slowly, and she recognized the signs of someone giving up on life. "You're not fine. You're drinking too much. You're barely eating. And yesterday, Mrs. Patterson said you looked at her car for 20 minutes before remembering what she'd asked you to fix." The accusation stung because it was accurate. Marcus's legendary focus and attention to detail, the qualities that had built Reed's Auto Repair's reputation over 3 generations, were deteriorating under the weight of his emotional turmoil. He'd begun making mistakes that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier, forgetting to order parts, misdiagnosing simple problems, losing track of appointments. Miguel Santos attempted an intervention the following week and arriving at the shop after hours to find Marcus sitting in the dark, staring at the workbench where Elena had once sat reading while he worked. "Marcus, this has got to stop," Miguel said, flipping on the overhead lights and taking in his friend's appearance unshaven, wearing the same work shirt for the 3rd consecutive day, surrounded by the evidence of declining standards. You're destroying yourself over a woman who lied to you. That's not helping anybody. You don't understand, Marcus replied, without looking up from the workbench. It wasn't just lying, Miguel. She made me believe in things I'd given up on. She made me think I could have a life beyond just surviving, beyond just taking care of Amy and keeping the shop running. And all of it was fake. Miguel sat down across from his friend, choosing his words carefully. But Amy's scholarship is real. Your feelings for Elena were real. The fact that she lied about her identity doesn't mean everything that happened between you was meaningless. Doesn't it? Marcus finally looked up, his eyes bloodshot and hollow. How can I tell what was real when the person I fell in love with doesn't exist? Elena Martinez was perfect for me, struggling, but independent, smart, but not intimidating, successful, but not wealthy. But Elena Vasquez, she's from a different species, Miguel. We don't breathe the same air. The philosophical conversation that might have helped 6 months earlier felt pointless now. Marcus had lost more than a relationship. He'd lost faith in his ability to judge people, to trust his instincts, to believe that good things could happen to working people like himself without hidden costs or complicated explanations. The shop's financial situation deteriorated rapidly without Elena's invisible support network. Customers who'd been referred by her business contacts stopped coming. The equipment that had been upgraded through warranty programs started requiring expensive repairs that Marcus couldn't afford. Yes, crushing Marcus discovered that his pride had been subsidized. The confidence he'd felt about his business's prospects had been built on Elena's money rather than his own improvements. We're 3 months behind on everything, Amy reported after reviewing their finances with the grim precision of someone who'd learned too young that money problems didn't solve themselves. The bank wants to schedule another meeting about the mortgage. The utility companies are threatening shutoffs, and we owe suppliers almost $15,000. Marcus stared at the numbers that represented the mathematical conclusion of Elena's departure from their lives. Without her hidden assistance, Reed's Auto Repair was exactly what it had been before she'd arrived, a failing small business run by a good man who couldn't compete with chain operations and discount chains. Maybe it's time to give up, Marcus said quietly. Maybe I was kidding myself thinking I could make this work. Amy's response was swift and fierce. Don't you dare blame Elena for your problems. We were struggling before she showed up, and we're struggling now that she's gone. But we were making it work, Dad. We were finding solutions and building something together. Don't let her lies make you forget what you're capable of. But Marcus couldn't separate his growing despair from Elena's deception. She'd given him a taste of security and success, then revealed that it had all been artificial. The contrast between sponsored prosperity and authentic struggle felt like a cruel joke played by someone with the resources to make other people's lives into entertainment. Father Rodriguez found Marcus in St. Mary's Church on a Tuesday afternoon, sitting in the back pew and staring at the crucifixion scene with the expression of a man looking for answers that didn't seem to exist. She broke more than my heart, Marcus confided to the priest who'd known his family for 3 generations. She broke my faith in, I don't know, in the possibility that things can get better through honest work and good intentions. Elena made everything look easy, but it was only easy because she was secretly solving all the hard parts. Marcus, Father Rodriguez said gently, what if the lesson isn't that good, things are impossible, but that they're more valuable when they're earned honestly? What if Elena's deception was her failure, not proof of your inadequacy? But Marcus was past the point where philosophical comfort could touch his practical despair. Elena Vasquez had demonstrated that love, security, and hope were commodities that could be purchased by people with sufficient resources. Everyone else, people like Marcus Reed, were just background characters in stories written by those who could afford to control the narrative. The Palo Alto mansion that had once felt like a prison now felt like a tomb. Elena wandered through rooms designed by award-winning architects, past furniture, selected by internationally recognized stylists, surrounded by art worth more than most people's lifetime earnings, and felt more alone than she'd ever imagined possible. The penthouse had always been quiet, but since leaving Oakland, the silence felt oppressive, broken only by the sound of her own footsteps echoing off polished marble floors. Grace Chen found Elena 3 days after the confrontation with Marcus, sitting in her home office at 6 a.m., still wearing the clothes she'd worn to Friday's disastrous meeting. Elena hadn't showered, hadn't eaten, and apparently hadn't slept, judging by the untouched bed and the empty coffee cups scattered across her desk. "Elena, you look terrible," Grace said with the directness that their 15-year friendship permitted. "When's the last time you ate something?" "I don't remember," Elena replied without looking up from her laptop screen, where she'd been obsessively reading about Reed's Auto Repair's financial situation through credit monitoring services that money could access. "Grace, did you know Marcus is 3 months behind on his mortgage? That without the customer referrals we arranged his business is failing?" Grace sat down across from her friend and CEO, taking in Elena's hollow-eyed appearance and manic energy. "Elena, you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. And you can't build a relationship on lies, no matter how good your intentions." "But I can help him," Elena insisted, anonymously like before. "I can arrange more business referrals, pay his mortgage, through shell companies, create new grant programs." "Stop." Grace's voice carried the authority of someone who'd watched Elena make both brilliant and catastrophic decisions over the years. "You're talking about stalking him with money. That's not love, Elena. That's obsession." The accusation hit Elena like cold water. She'd been sitting in her office for 3 days, using her vast resources to monitor and analyze Marcus's life from a distance, telling herself she was motivated by love when she was actually demonstrating the kind of controlling behavior that had driven him away in the first place. Elena's attempts to return to her normal routine, board meetings, foundation strategy sessions, business development calls, felt like performing a role in a play she no longer understood. The work that had once energized her now seemed pointless, a series of abstract financial manipulations that created wealth for people who already had more money than they could spend in multiple lifetimes. "Elena, you're not present," board member David Kim observed during a quarterly review meeting where Elena had spent an hour nodding appropriately while completely failing to engage with revenue projections and market analysis. "Your mind is somewhere else entirely." "I'm fine," Elena replied automatically, the same response she'd been giving to everyone who expressed concern about her obvious deterioration. "Just thinking about strategic implications." But Elena wasn't thinking about business strategy. She was thinking about Marcus's hands, scarred and stained from honest work, guiding hers as he taught her to check tire pressure. She was remembering Amy's laughter during homework sessions, where Elena had felt more useful than in any board meeting she'd ever attended. She was reliving conversations in the garage where she'd been valued for her thoughts rather than her net worth. The social isolation was almost worse than the emotional pain. Elena had never had many genuine friendships. Wealth tended to attract people who wanted something, rather than people who simply enjoyed her company. But she'd had professional relationships, casual acquaintances, social obligations that created the illusion of human connection. Now even those felt meaningless. "I received a call from the Chronicle," Grace reported during one of their weekly check-ins. "They want to interview you about the cross-class romance story. Apparently it's generating significant social media engagement about economic inequality and relationship dynamics." Elena felt sick. The private devastation of losing Marcus and Amy had become public entertainment, dissected by journalists and social media commentators who treated real human pain like material for think pieces about class consciousness and wealth disparity. "Decline the interview," Elena said, "and see if our legal team can discourage further coverage." Elena trying to suppress the story will only make it bigger. "Maybe it would be better to know." Elena's voice carried a finality that ended the discussion. "I won't turn Marcus and Amy's pain into a publicity opportunity for the foundation." Elena's sleep became sporadic and haunted. She'd wake at 3 a.m. from dreams where she was back in Marcus's garage listening to him explain the difference between timing belt issues and transmission problems, while Amy did calculus homework in the background. In the dreams, she was always about to tell them the truth about her identity, but she'd wake before the words came, leaving her with the phantom sensation of honesty she'd never quite achieved. The charitable work that had once provided meaning felt hollow now. Elena would write checks for millions of dollars to support causes she intellectually believed in, but the mechanical act of giving money felt disconnected from the hands-on helping she'd experienced in Oakland. When she'd tutored Amy or listened to Marcus's business concerns, she'd been contributing something of herself rather than just transferring wealth from one account to another. "I keep thinking about what I said to Marcus. Elena confided to Father Martinez during one of her rare ventures outside the mansion seeking counsel from the priest who served Oakland's Latino community. I told him my feelings were real, but how can feelings be real when they're built on lies? Father Martinez studied Elena with the compassion of someone who'd counseled many people through moral crises. Perhaps the question isn't whether your feelings were real, but whether you're willing to do the work of earning forgiveness and rebuilding trust. How can I rebuild trust when my very existence is a reminder of the lies I told? By accepting that love sometimes requires sacrifice, the priest replied. Even the sacrifice of your own happiness, if that's what's best for the people you claim to love. Elena left the church with the terrible understanding that truly loving Marcus and Amy might mean accepting their absence from her life. The cruelest irony was that her wealth, the thing that had created barriers between them, also made it impossible for her to prove her love through the kinds of sacrifices that working people understood. She couldn't struggle financially to demonstrate commitment, couldn't give up comfort to prove authenticity, couldn't show devotion through the kind of daily efforts that characterized Marcus's love for his daughter. Elena Vasquez had everything money could buy and nothing that money couldn't destroy. She sat in her mansion each evening, watching the sun set over San Francisco Bay, wondering if this was what she'd earned through a lifetime of equating success with accumulation, perfect isolation in a perfect prison, with perfect views of a world she'd lost the ability to authentically inhabit. The call came at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in late January, piercing through Elena's restless sleep like a siren. She'd been dreaming about Marcus's garage again, the recurring nightmare where she tried to explain herself, but found only silence where words should be. The harsh ring of her bedside phone pulled her back to the sterile reality of her Palo Alto mansion, where caller ID displayed a number she didn't recognize but somehow felt familiar. Ms. Vasquez, this is Dr. Sarah Kim at Oakland General Hospital. I'm calling about Amy Reed. She's been in a serious car accident. Elena's blood turned to ice water. She sat bolt upright, her mind instantly clear despite the hour and the shock. How serious is she? Is she going to be okay? She's stable but critical, multiple fractures, internal bleeding, possible traumatic brain injury. We're preparing for emergency surgery, but Dr. Kim's voice carried the careful neutrality that medical professionals use when delivering devastating news. The family should be here. Are you listed as an emergency contact? No. Elena whispered the word, carrying the weight of all her regrets. No, I'm not family, but Marcus Reed, her father, he should be there. He is. Mr. Reed is in the waiting room, but he's struggling with the medical costs. The surgery alone is estimated at $200,000, and with Amy's injuries, she'll need extended intensive care. Their insurance has significant gaps, and Mr. Reed is trying to figure out how to. Kim paused, clearly uncomfortable discussing a patient's financial situation with a stranger. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have called this number. It was listed in Amy's phone under emergency contacts. Elena's heart stopped. Amy had kept her number, had listed her as someone to call in an emergency even after learning about the lies and deception. The teenager who had every reason to hate Elena had still trusted her enough to include her in the most desperate moments. Doctor, please listen carefully, Elena said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. Whatever Amy Reed needs, surgery, intensive care, rehabilitation, anything, do it. All of it. I'll guarantee payment for everything. Ma'am, I can't authorize treatment based on a phone promise. My name is Elena Vasquez. Look me up. I'll have legal authorization and financial guarantees to your hospital within 30 minutes. Just please don't let money be the reason Amy doesn't get the best possible care. Elena hung up and immediately called her legal team, her financial advisors, and Grace Chen, setting in motion the kind of emergency response that only unlimited resources could provide. But as she threw on clothes and prepared to drive to Oakland, Elena realized that money, the thing that had created every barrier between her and the Reed family, was now the only thing that might save Amy's life. The drive from Palo Alto to Oakland had never felt longer. Elena's hands shook as she gripped the steering wheel, her mind cycling through worst-case scenarios and desperate prayers. Amy Reed, brilliant, fierce dreams of Stanford. Amy, lying broken in a hospital bed because of a random accident that had nothing to do with Elena's deception, but everything to do with the cosmic unfairness that seemed to target good people with impossible regularity. Elena arrived at Oakland General to find Marcus in the surgical waiting room, looking like a man who'd aged years in a single night. His clothes were rumpled, his face gray with exhaustion and fear, his hands clasped so tightly in his lap that his knuckles had gone white. He looked up when Elena entered, and she saw something she'd never seen in his eyes before, complete desperation. "Elena," Marcus said, his voice cracked and hollow. "They called you. Amy had my number listed as an emergency contact," Elena replied, sitting carefully in the chair beside him, maintaining enough distance to respect his space while close enough to offer support. "Marcus, I've already arranged for the hospital to authorize any treatment Amy needs. Money won't be an issue." Marcus stared at her for a long moment, and Elena watched him process the implications that once again Elena Vasquez was solving problems with wealth that Marcus Reed couldn't solve with determination and hard work. But instead of anger, Elena saw only relief. "Thank you," Marcus whispered. "I don't care about anything else right now. Pride, anger, hurt feelings, none of it matters compared to Amy's life. If your money can help her, then I'm grateful for your money." Elena felt tears streaming down her face. "Marcus, I would give every dollar I have to undo the lies I told you both. But if I can't do that, at least let me use what I have to help Amy recover." "The doctor said surgery could take 6 hours," Marcus said, his voice hollow with exhaustion. 6 hours of not knowing if my daughter is going to survive, going to walk again, going to remember who she is when she wakes up." Elena understood with crystalline clarity that this was her moment of truth. Not the moment when her deception was revealed, not the confrontation in the garage, but this moment when she could demonstrate whether her love for the Reed family was real enough to transcend her need for their forgiveness. As dawn broke over Oakland General Hospital, Elena made decisions that would permanently alter her relationship with wealth and power. While Marcus dozed fitfully in the waiting room chair, Elena worked quietly from the hospital's family lounge, transforming her business empire into an instrument of genuine service rather than personal comfort. The first call was to Grace Chen, who answered on the first ring despite the early hour. "Elena, how is Amy?" "Still in surgery. Grace, I need you to draft papers immediately. I'm donating half of my personal wealth, $1.2 billion, to create a community medical fund for working families who can't afford emergency health care." Grace was quiet for a long moment. "Elena, that's an enormous decision to make during a crisis. Maybe you should—" "I've never been more certain of anything," Elena interrupted. "And I want it done today," announced publicly, with Reed's Auto Repair mentioned specifically as the inspiration for the fund. "I want Marcus to understand that this isn't about buying forgiveness or controlling his life. This is about using resources the way they should be used to prevent other families from facing impossible choices between medical care and financial survival." The second transformation was personal rather than financial. Elena called the Bay Area Business Journal and requested an interview, not to manage the narrative about her relationship with Marcus, but to take full responsibility for her deception and publicly acknowledge the harm it had caused. "I want to be clear about something," Elena told reporter Jennifer Walsh in a conversation that would be published that afternoon. "Marcus Reed and his daughter Amy say are extraordinary people who deserved honesty from me. They welcomed me into their lives with generous hearts, and I repaid that generosity with a deception. Any pain they're experiencing now is my responsibility, not theirs." The interview continued for an hour, with Elena answering questions she'd spent months avoiding. Yes, she'd lied about her identity. Yes, she'd secretly provided financial assistance. Yes, she'd violated their trust in ways that couldn't be excused by good intentions. But she also spoke about what the Reed family had taught her about authentic love, honest work, and the difference between charity and genuine care. By noon, Elena had restructured her entire life around principles she'd learned in Marcus's garage. The Vasquez Foundation would no longer operate from a distance, writing checks and managing portfolios. Instead, Elena would work directly with communities, spending time in neighborhoods like Fruitvale, learning about problems before attempting to solve them. "I'm moving to Oakland," Elena told Grace during their afternoon call. "A modest apartment, nothing fancy. I want to live in the community I'm trying to serve." "Elena, you don't need to become poor to prove you're sincere," Grace replied with the practical concern of a longtime friend. "I'm not trying to become poor. I'm trying to become useful. There's a difference." Elena's most difficult decision involved Vasquez Technologies itself. The company her father had built represented everything she'd inherited rather than earned. During Amy's surgery, Elena had realized that continuing to control a business empire felt like maintaining the very barriers that had made her deception seem necessary. Elena announced her intention to gradually transfer ownership of Vasquez Technologies to employee collectives, keeping only enough involvement to ensure responsible transition. The decision would take years to implement, but it represented a fundamental shift from accumulating wealth to distributing opportunity. I want to work for things rather than simply owning them, Elena explained to the company's board of directors, who received the news with varying degrees of shock and concern. My father built this company to serve communities, not to concentrate wealth in a single family. As evening approached and Amy's surgery entered its seventh hour, Elena sat beside Marcus in the waiting room, both of them exhausted but maintained in vigil. The announcements about Elena's wealth redistribution had begun appearing on news websites and social media, but Marcus seemed unaware of the developing story. Marcus, Elena said quietly, I need you to know that what I'm doing, the medical fund, the company changes all of it. This isn't about winning you back or proving myself to you. This is about becoming the person I should have been from the beginning. Marcus looked at her with eyes that held exhaustion, hope, and something that might have been the beginning of forgiveness. Elena, I'm too tired to be angry anymore, and too scared about Amy to care about anything else. But I want you to know what you're doing for her, for other families like ours, it matters. She's going to be okay, Elena said, though she had no medical training to support the promise. Amy's strong like her father. She's going to recover and go to Stanford and change the world. I hope so, Marcus whispered. God, I hope so. Dr. Kim emerged from the surgical wing at 9:30 p.m., her surgical mask pulled down to reveal a tired but relieved expression. Mr. Reed, Amy's surgery was successful. She's stable, and while recovery will take time, we're optimistic about her prognosis. She's asking for both of you. Amy Reed woke up in the ICU 3 days after surgery to find her father asleep in the chair beside her bed, and Elena Vasquez sitting quietly in the corner, reading what appeared to be community development reports rather than business magazines. The teenager's first coherent thought was confusion about Elena's presence. Hadn't they decided she was persona non grata in the Reed family? Dad, Amy's voice came out as a whisper, her throat raw from intubation. Marcus jerked awake instantly, his face flooding with relief as he saw Amy's eyes open and focused. Hey, sweetheart, you're okay. You're going to be fine. Amy's gaze shifted to Elena, who had quietly closed her reading materials and moved closer to the bed. Elena, why are you here? Elena's throat tightened. After 3 days of sitting vigil, she'd imagined this conversation countless times, but facing Amy's direct question made all of her prepared words evaporate. You had my number in your phone as an emergency contact. The hospital called me when you were hurt. I forgot I'd put you on there, Amy said, though something in her expression suggested the listing hadn't been accidental. Despite her anger about Elena's deception, Amy had apparently recognized that in a real crisis, Elena Vasquez was someone who could make things happen. Marcus explained the basics of Amy's accident. A drunk driver had run a red light. Amy's car had been hit on the passenger side. She'd been unconscious for almost 2 hours before arriving at the hospital. What Marcus didn't explain was the financial miracle that had allowed Amy to receive immediate comprehensive medical care without regard to insurance limitations or ability to pay. Dad, Amy said, her voice growing stronger. The nurses keep talking about how all my medical bills are covered. They say there is some kind of special fund. Do you know anything about that? Marcus looked at Elena, who had been dreading this moment for 3 days. Elena arranged for the hospital to provide your care without financial constraints. She made sure money wasn't a factor in your treatment. Amy studied Elena's face with the sharp intelligence that had made her Stanford material. How much did my surgery cost? It doesn't matter, Elena replied. How much? Amy insisted. Elena sighed. Including surgery, ICU rehabilitation, and follow-up care, probably around $400,000. Amy was quiet for a long moment, processing numbers that represented more than her father earned in multiple years. Elena, that's an incredible amount of money. Why would you pay that for someone who was angry at you? The question cut straight to the heart of everything Elena had been struggling with for months. Because I love you, both of you, Not because of what you can do for me, not because you make me feel useful, but because you're family to me. And family helps family especially when they're not getting along. Amy's eyes filled with tears. But we're not actually family. We're just people you met by accident and lied to for months. You're right, Elena admitted. We're not family by blood or law. But Amy family isn't just about genetics. It's about choosing to show up for each other again and again, regardless of circumstances. And I'm going to keep showing up for you and your father as long as you'll let me. Marcus had been listening to this exchange with growing understanding of how fundamentally Elena had changed since her deception was revealed. The woman sitting in Amy's hospital room wasn't the polished executive from the newspaper photos or even the carefully constructed Elena Martinez from the garage. This was someone who'd stripped away all pretense and was offering herself flawed, honest, and completely vulnerable. Elena, Marcus said quietly, I've been reading about what you've been doing. The medical fund the company changes moving to Oakland. That's not someone trying to buy forgiveness. That's someone who's completely restructured their life around different values. Elena met his eyes. I learned those values from you and Amy, from watching how you take care of each other, how you help your community, how you find meaning in honest work rather than accumulated wealth. You taught me the difference between having money and being rich. Amy struggled to sit up straighter in her hospital bed. Elena, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. When you were helping me with calculus and coming to my soccer games and making dinner with us, was any of that real? Or were you just playing a role? Elena considered the question carefully. Amy, the person I was with you and your father was more real than I'd been in years, maybe ever. The lies were about my circumstances, not my feelings. When I laughed at your jokes, when I cheered at your games, when I helped with homework, those weren't performances. They were the most authentic moments of my adult life. Amy nodded slowly, as if Elena's answer confirmed something she'd been hoping to hear. Okay, then maybe we can figure out how to move forward from here. Marcus reached for Elena's hand across Amy's hospital bed. Yeah, maybe we can. 2 weeks after Amy was discharged from the hospital, Father Rodriguez arranged a meeting at Samoa Mary's church on a quiet Thursday evening. The priest had been counseling both Marcus and Elena separately, watching two people who clearly loved each other struggle with the aftermath of profound betrayal and the possibility of genuine forgiveness. Elena arrived first, sitting in the same back pew where Marcus had wrestled with his despair weeks earlier. She'd kept her promise to move to Oakland, renting a modest two-bedroom apartment 6 blocks from the church, walking distance from Reed's Auto Repair, though she hadn't been back to the shop since that devastating Friday in December. The simplicity of her new life, cooking her own meals, taking public transportation, shopping at the same grocery stores as her neighbors, had been more fulfilling than any luxury she'd previously enjoyed. Marcus entered the church carrying the weight of 2 weeks' worth of careful consideration. Amy's accident had clarified things that months of anger had obscured. When his daughter's life hung in the balance, Elena's lies had mattered less than her immediate unwavering commitment to Amy's welfare. The woman who'd sat beside him for 3 days in the hospital waiting room, who'd restructured her entire existence to help other families avoid similar crises, wasn't the calculating manipulator he'd convinced himself she was. Thank you for coming, Elena said as Marcus sat beside her, leaving enough space to honor his boundaries while close enough for private conversation. Marcus studied her face, exhausted but somehow more peaceful than he'd ever seen her, even during their happiest moments in the garage. Amy wanted me to give you this, he said, handing Elena a handwritten letter. She's been working on it since she got home from the hospital. Elena opened the letter with trembling hands. Dear Elena, I've been thinking about trust and family and what it means to forgive someone who hurt you. Dad taught me that love isn't about being perfect. It's about being willing to make things right when you mess up. You messed up pretty badly with the lying, but what you did when I was hurt showed me who you really are, underneath all the complicated stuff. I don't want you to feel guilty about the scholarship anymore. I looked up my test scores and grades compared to other Stanford admits, and I earned that scholarship whether you created it or not. Maybe you made it possible, but I made it happen. There's a difference. I miss our homework sessions. I miss having someone who understands calculus better than my dad, though don't tell him I said that. I miss having a mom figure who doesn't treat me like I'm fragile because I lost my real mom. If you and Dad can figure out how to trust each other again, I'd like you to know that I want you in our family. Not as charity or a project, but as yourself. The real you, whoever that turns out to be. Love, Amy. P.S. Dad misses you too, even though he's too stubborn to admit it. Elena wiped tears from her eyes as she finished reading. She's remarkable. You've raised an incredible young woman. She gets her wisdom from her mother, Marcus replied. But her forgiveness, that's something she learned on her own. He paused, studying Elena's face in the soft light filtering through the church's stained glass windows. Elena, I need to say something. I've been angry for weeks about the lies you told, but I haven't been honest about the lies I told myself. Elena looked at him questioningly. I convinced myself I was angry about the deception, but really I was angry about the money. About feeling like I wasn't good enough, successful enough, important enough to deserve someone like you without charity being involved. Marcus's voice carried the weight of difficult self-examination. I made your wealth about my inadequacy instead of understanding that your feelings were separate from your bank account. Marcus, you had every right to be angry. I violated your trust in the most fundamental way possible. Maybe, but Elena, what you've done since Amy's accident, the medical fund restructuring your company, moving to Oakland, that's not someone trying to buy forgiveness. That's someone who learned something about authentic living and decided to act on it regardless of personal cost. Elena felt hope flickering in her chest like a candle in wind. Does that mean you might be willing to try again? To see if we can build something honest this time? Marcus reached for her hand, his calloused fingers interlacing with hers. I think it means I'd like to get to know Elena Vasquez the same way I got to know Elena Martinez. Starting fresh with complete honesty about who we both are. That sounds terrifying, Elena admitted. What if you don't like the real me as much as you like the version I created? What if I like her more? Marcus countered. Elena, the woman who sat with me in that hospital waiting room, who restructured her entire life to help families she'd never meet, that woman is pretty remarkable. I'd like to see what else she's capable of when she's not hiding behind lies. Elena lifted their joined hands and kissed Marcus's knuckles, tasting the familiar salt and motor oil that had become synonymous with home. I love you, she said simply. I loved you when I was lying about my identity, and I love you now that you know the truth. I want to spend the rest of my life earning the trust I should have given you from the beginning. Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile Elena had seen from him since the newspaper article had shattered their previous life. Then let's start earning it together. 6 months later, Elena Vasquez and Marcus Reed stood before Oakland's City Council to present their proposal for the Reed Vasquez Community Auto Center, a social enterprise that would provide affordable car repair services while training young people for careers in automotive technology. The venture represented everything they'd learned about bridging economic divides through practical collaboration rather than charitable distance. Working families shouldn't have to choose between car repairs and rent payments. Elena addressed the council, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd learned to advocate effectively for community needs. But traditional charity models don't address the root problems, they just treat symptoms. The Reed Vasquez Center will provide market-rate services at below-market prices while creating pathways to middle-class careers. Marcus stood beside her wearing his best shirt in the confidence of a man who'd learned to accept partnership rather than pride as his primary motivation. This isn't about handouts, he added. It's about creating systems that work for working people. Quality training, fair wages, honest service, and community ownership. The council approved their proposal unanimously, but Elena's greatest victory had come 3 months earlier, when Amy had chosen to attend UC Berkeley's engineering program instead of Stanford. I want to be close to home while you and Dad figure out this family thing, Amy had explained. Plus, Berkeley's financial aid package means you don't have to worry about my scholarship coming from family money. Elena had smiled at Amy's diplomatic way of acknowledging their complex situation while asserting her own independence. The teenager was building her own relationship with Elena separate from her father's romantic involvement based on mutual respect rather than financial dependence. The Reed Vasquez Center opened in September, occupying a renovated warehouse that Elena had purchased and Marcus had designed for maximum efficiency and safety. The facility included not just repair bays, but also classrooms, a community meeting space, and a small cafe run by Rosa Martinez, whose ancient Honda Elena had once pretended needed constant maintenance. Elena Vasquez, Rosa had said during the center's opening celebration, "You're still overpaying for car maintenance, but at least now it's going to good use." Elena's integration into Oakland's Fruitvale community had required patience and humility. Some neighbors remained suspicious of her wealth and motives, but most had come to appreciate her consistent presence at community meetings, her willingness to listen before offering solutions, and her commitment to addressing problems with local input rather than external expertise. Marcus's integration into Elena's world had been equally challenging. Board meetings at Vasquez Technologies charity galas for the medical fund, conversations with Elena's Stanford MBA friends, all required him to navigate social situations where his working-class background felt conspicuous. But Elena had learned to create bridges between her worlds rather than asking Marcus to abandon his own. "You don't need to become someone else to be part of my life," Elena had told him after a particularly awkward dinner with her former executive circle. "I fell in love with Marcus Reed, auto mechanic and single father. I don't want you to transform into someone I might not love as much." Their relationship developed slowly, built on daily choices to be honest about fears, insecurities, and hopes rather than protecting each other from difficult truths. Elena learned to share business decisions with Marcus, not because he needed to approve them, but because partnership meant including him in the concerns that shaped her days. Marcus learned to accept Elena's help with expansion plans for the community center, understanding that her resources were tools they could use together rather than charities that diminished his contribution. Amy had become the bridge between them, equally comfortable discussing college plans with Elena and working alongside Marcus in the garage. "You two are weird together," she'd observed with teenage directness. "But you're good weird, like you make each other braver." As autumn settled over Oakland, Elena and Marcus stood on the small balcony of Elena's apartment, looking out over the neighborhood that had become home to them both. The community center's lights were still on, where evening classes taught automotive skills to young people who would graduate with both certification and job placement assistance. "Think this is going to work?" Marcus asked, gesturing toward the center, and by extension, their entire improbable partnership. "I think we're going to make it work," Elena replied, leaning into his embrace. One honest day at a time. 18 months later, Elena Vasquez Reed stood in the kitchen of their modest Oakland home preparing breakfast, while Marcus helped their 6-month-old daughter Sophia navigate her first attempts at solid food. The house they'd chosen together, a 1940s craftsman in the heart of Fruitvale, bore no resemblance to Elena's former Palo Alto mansion, but every room felt alive with the chaotic joy of an authentic family. "Dad, Sophia's got sweet potato everywhere, except her mouth," Amy called from the breakfast table where she was reviewing mechanical engineering homework between bites of Elena's pancakes. Now a sophomore at UC Berkeley, Amy split her time between campus and home, working part-time at the Reed Vasquez Community Auto Center while maintaining a 3.8 GPA. Marcus laughed as he attempted to clean Sophia's face, their daughter's infectious giggle filling the kitchen with the kind of happiness that couldn't be purchased or planned. "She gets her efficiency from your side of the family," he told Elena. Elena smiled, one hand resting on her barely visible second pregnancy, a surprise that had delighted them all despite the challenges of managing 2 small children while running a growing social enterprise. At 49, Elena had found the family she'd thought was impossible, built not through genetic luck, but through the daily choice to love people honestly and completely. The Reed Vasquez Center now employed 23 full-time staff members and had trained over 200 young people for automotive careers. Elena's medical fund had helped 847 families access emergency health care, while her gradual divestment from Vasquez Technologies had created employee ownership opportunities for thousands of workers. "Family meeting tonight," Amy announced, checking her phone. "Carmen wants to FaceTime with all of us to discuss her engagement." Elena's relationship with Marcus's ex-wife had evolved into mutual respect based on their shared commitment to Amy's well-being. Carmen's recovery from addiction and her subsequent work as a substance abuse counselor had created space for genuine friendship rather than competition. "Tell her congratulations from all of us," Elena said, meaning it completely. The complex family they'd created included biological connections, chosen relationships, and love that transcended traditional boundaries. Marcus kissed Elena's forehead as he passed Sophia balanced on his hip, heading toward the living room where morning cartoons awaited. Perfect chaos, he murmured against her hair. The best kind, Elena agreed. As Elena watched her husband teach their daughter to clap along with the cartoon music while Amy explained thermodynamics problems at the breakfast table, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. Real love, she'd learned, wasn't about finding someone who fit perfectly into your existing life. It was about being willing to become the person worthy of the love you wanted to receive. The greatest wealth wasn't measured in investment portfolios or real estate holdings, but in the daily choice to show up honestly for the people who mattered most. True security came not from accumulating resources, but from building relationships strong enough to withstand the inevitable storms of human imperfection. Elena had spent years believing that money could solve problems, but the Reed family had taught her that some problems, loneliness, disconnection, the hunger for authentic purpose could only be solved through the courage to be vulnerable with people who had every reason to reject you, but chose love instead. Class differences. Economic inequality and social barriers were real and significant, but they weren't insurmountable when people approached each other with genuine curiosity rather than predetermined assumptions. Marcus had taught Elena that intelligence and wisdom weren't distributed according to educational credentials or bank account balances. Elena had taught Marcus that wealth could be a tool for justice rather than just accumulation. Most importantly, they'd both learned that second chances weren't automatic. They had to be earned through consistent action, honest communication, and the daily decision to choose growth over comfort. Subscribe to our channel if you believe that love can bridge any divide when it's built on truth rather than convenience. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that everyone deserves a second chance to become their best self. Comment below and tell us, what would you have done in Marcus's position? Would you have been able to forgive Elena's deception, or would the betrayal have been too deep to overcome? Like this video if you believe that the greatest fortunes are built on relationships rather than bank accounts, and that sometimes the most unlikely love stories teach us the most important lessons about what it means to show up authentically for the people we care about. Remember, real wealth is measured not by what you can afford to buy, but by what you are willing to sacrifice for the people who matter most. True success isn't about accumulating more than you need, but about using what you have to create opportunities for others to thrive. Thanks for watching, and remember, every ending is also a beginning. If you have the courage to start over with honesty, humility, and hope.